In the remotest corners of history, amidst the ancestral shadows of lost time, lies an ancient tome shrouded in mystery and enigma. The Book of Melchizedek. Rescued from the deep abysses of the Dead Sea, this ancestral manuscript emerges as a beacon of forbidden knowledge, whispering forgotten secrets into the ears of those brave enough to challenge the limits of human understanding. Within its yellowed and worn pages, the wisdom of centuries is inscribed, recounting ancient tales of forgotten gods and heroes fallen into the mists of time, but it also hides dark omens, veiled prophecies waiting to be deciphered by intrepid minds, willing to confront the truth that lies hidden behind the veil of darkness. Who was Melchizedek, the enigmatic guardian of this arcane knowledge? What secrets does his book hold? What mysteries lurk in the depths of the Dead Sea, where it has lain since time immemorial? Dare to delve into the shadows of history and discover the powerful legacy that awaits within the pages of the Book of Melchizedek, a work that defies the bounds of reason and awakens the thirst for knowledge in those who dare to heed its call. Chapter 1. The Tale of a Vessel. When Abraham was informed of the battle where he and many others were captured, he quickly received orders from the Lord to undertake the great liberation. This meant he had to summon and prepare his shepherds with a vessel of special characteristics. While he rested in the shade of an oak tree in Mamre near his tent, he hastened to one of his nephew Lot's servants who, almost out of breath, began to tell him a great tragedy. The day before, a battle had erupted between the cities of the plain, with 4 kings against 5. Among the losers was the city of Sodom, and many inhabitants, including his nephew Lot, had been captured. This news deeply disturbed him, and he felt an urgent need to come to Lot's aid, even though he himself was in a fragile state. Despite his condition, Abraham, a peaceful man with a deep aversion to shed blood, considering himself a man of peace, decided to answer the call. However, most of his servants were not trained in combat. As they had been raised as shepherds, they wielded staffs to guide the flocks, with staffs at their belts instead of swords and spears. They carried buckets of fresh water at their waist to quench the sheep's thirst, instead of wine to become intoxicated. Instead of shields, they had staffs, and instead of trumpets, they used horns to summon the flocks. Abraham amusedly imagined a battle between his servants and the armies of the 5 victorious kings. As he pondered, the voice of the one who always guided him echoed in his ears, reminding him not to underestimate the instruments of the shepherds, sanctified by the fire of sacrifice, for they were the ones who would accomplish the great liberation. The Lord then began to give orders, prompting Abraham to advance by faith, without knowing how this liberation would be realized. The first step was the summoning of all the shepherds, who, abandoning their flocks, made their way to the oak tree in Mamre with their pastoral instruments. In total, 600 shepherds arrived. Abraham ordered the jars to be emptied, placing the oil in the largest one. After completing this task, he asked each shepherd to take the wool from a sheep and mix it with the oil from the jars. Then, the Lord commanded him to take a large clay jar, fill it halfway with olive oil, and make a long wick of wool, wrapping one half in the oil and leaving the other half fixed at the top of the jar. At the end of this task, the Lord commanded Abraham not to light the wick with the fire from the altar. So, as he approached the sacred fire still burning from the morning sacrifice, a small flame leaped towards the wick and slowly began to feed on the oil, transforming into a flame visible from afar. Chapter 2. Abraham embarks on the journey with the vessel on his shoulders. Abraham sets out on the journey with the vessel on his shoulders, anticipating many sufferings and trials ahead on his path. As he carries the vessel, many cannot bear the shame and several abandon him. Sarah's disbelief becomes evident as he begins his march towards the cities of the plain, accompanied by the shepherds. Mocking voices begin to be heard, seeing him with the incandescent vessel in broad daylight, labeling his behavior as madness. The news spreads, and many people come to meet him, urging him to abandon the vessel, fearing it would destroy his reputation and dignity before all. Abraham speaks to them of the armies and his joint mission with the shepherds, but they quickly conclude that he is mad and attempt to forcibly snatch the vessel from him. Abraham holds onto it firmly, thwarting their attempt. Ashamed of the situation, many shepherds begin to part ways. Some return to their tents, while others join those who mock his strange behavior. Feeling more alone than ever, with the heavy vessel on his shoulders, Abraham begins to feel anxious. Seeking someone to share his experience with, he realizes that all look upon him with disapproval. He then remembers Sarah, his beloved wife, who has always supported him in difficult times. However, when he sees her amidst the crowd, he is surprised to see the same contempt in her eyes as that of the mockers. Deciding to walk alone, he tries to put himself in the shoes of those who deem him mad, admitting that no sensible person would depart without a defined destination while carrying a vessel with a flame in broad daylight. With the vessel of salvation on his shoulders, Abraham advances on the unknown path, diminishing the mockery that weighed heavy on his mind since the oak tree in Mamre. Doubts about his future flood in, and the humiliations suffered since the summoning of the shepherds seriously make him consider the possibility of abandoning the vessel along the way and returning to the altar. Some shepherds and friends advise him to return to the altar, stating that he could regain the trust of the shepherds, perhaps even becoming the respected priest of old again, for the altar housed a fire much greater than the one he carried on his shoulders. As he is about to turn back, Sarah comes to meet him, dismayed by the shepherd's contempt, but she too seems to disapprove of his stubbornness in carrying this symbol of shame. She speaks to him of a plan to distance themselves and forget these humiliations, leaving behind the voice that sent him to the plain. Abraham responds that he is willing to follow her anywhere as long as he can take the vessel, now their altar, which will illuminate their nights with its flame. Sarah becomes even more irritated, not understanding his obstinacy in carrying this symbol of shame, and she returns to the tent, turning her back on him. Chapter 3. Abraham understands the meaning of the vessel. Abraham grasps the significance of the vessel and decides to shield its tiny flame from the cold winds that buffet it. Despite the mockery of the armies and the threats of extermination of the captives, Abraham presses on toward an uncertain future, guided only by the light of the flame, whose brilliance increases with the growing darkness. As he walks alone, he reflects on the small flame accompanying him. Accustomed to seeing the sacred fire on a grand altar amidst the praises of the shepherds, Abraham remembers the moments when he stood as master and priest, clad in luxurious robes, making sacrifices, brandishing a sword towards the heavens. He realizes that the flame he carries in a humble jar is a representation of the Messiah, the one who would separate from the great God to be God with us, becoming the companion of all their journeys. Transformed by this newfound conviction, the flame he bears shines even brighter. Abraham continues his journey with the weight of the jar on his shoulders, feeling the joy of a new revelation about the Creator's character. However, he soon faces difficult moments, with the cold winds threatening to extinguish the tiny flame. To protect it, he covers it with his body, sometimes walking backward, but always moving forward toward the valley. At daybreak, he finds himself at the gates of the plain, where he encounters numerous flocks. However, the presence of the fiery vessel causes tumults and confusion among the shepherds and their flocks. Despite the shepherds' irritation, Abraham continues his journey towards Sodom. As he advances, something interesting happens. Docile sheep begin to follow him, increasingly in number, forming a herd that struggles to keep up with him. The shepherds, furious at the loss of their sheep, witness this scene. Upon arriving at Sodom, Abraham finds the city empty and devastated, following the trail of the army. He draws closer to his objective, the mission for which he came. Arriving at the day-night countryside, he sees the great encampment of soldiers at the foot of a hill. He heads towards them, leading his newfound flock. From the summit of the mountain, he observes the encampment, with thousands of soldiers celebrating their victory and hundreds of captives, humiliated and hopeless. Abraham tries to imagine how the liberation could be achieved. His presence arouses curiosity among some soldiers, who mock him because of the smoking vessel. Abraham explains that he is there to free his nephew Lot, prompting mockery throughout the camp. However, quickly, the taunts turn into cries of shame and the proclamation that all captives will be exterminated the following morning, starting with Lot. Chapter 4. Abraham finds comfort in the arrival of his shepherds and allies. Abraham finds comfort in the arrival of his shepherds and allies, who have learned to love the light of the vessel and have shown their loyalty to Abraham. Guided by the divine voice of the Creator, Abraham begins to give strategic instructions to sow confusion and destruction among the enemy armies. As he imagines what the divine voice can accomplish to achieve such a miraculous liberation, a group of shepherds approaches Abraham, coming from Sodom. Initially, Abraham thinks they are enemy shepherds, coming to claim the spoils conquered with love. But his mistrust dissipates when he discovers they are his faithful shepherds. They arrive in small groups of 12, totaling 300 men. Their faces bear the traces of a great spiritual struggle to be by his side. They share their experiences and recount how, the previous night, they learned to love the light of the vessel, which has become a guiding star for them. Delighted by the presence of his humble shepherds, Abraham soon sees his faithful friends Aner, Skola, and Manu arriving, accompanied by 15 armed men. Knowing the dangers awaiting them in the valley, he instructs them to remain hidden until daybreak, awaiting instructions on their participation in the mission. Abraham then begins to give instructions to the shepherds, following the divine guidance emanating from the flame. The first task assigned to the shepherds is to watch over the flock until dusk. Then, upon their return, they are to attach the woolen wicks soaked in oil to the ends of their staffs, placing them inside the jars they will hold suspended upside down. Abraham then begins to light these torches with the fire of his torch until all 300 torches burn hidden inside these jars. Then, 40 of his valiant shepherds are ordered to advance silently towards the center of the enemy camp, surrounding all the captives. The remaining 260 shepherds will encircle the camp, awaiting the signal to break the jars with the horns. Guided by the voice of the flame, Abraham indicates the signals. When the last torch extinguishes in the camp, they must be alert, for a small lamp will be lit by one of the captives. As soon as the lamp starts to burn, all must run to their positions, avoiding any noise to avoid detection. The signal to break the jars with the horns would be the extinguishing of the lamp. After these instructions, the 260 shepherds, hidden in the shadow of the night, disperse into the valley and await the moment to surround the camp, while the remaining 40 take position near a vulnerable entrance to reach the captives. Late into the night, the torch of the last soldier extinguished, plunging the camp into total darkness and silence. Among the captives that night was a man experiencing the greatest anguish of his life, my nephew. After enduring mistreatment, he learned of the punishment awaiting him at daybreak. Desperate, he longed to see my face again and apologize for his transgression. Spotting the glow of a torch on the hill, he believed he had a vision. However, upon approaching, he discovered it was his dear uncle, and touched by faith, he lit his lamp, symbolizing his empty life without faith. The small flame of the lamp did not last long, but it was necessary to extinguish it to mark the great victory. As darkness once again covered the faces of the 1,300 shepherds, they struck the jars with their horns, releasing the hidden torches. A great noise, like a cavalry in battle, resounded everywhere while the torches remained suspended. The 300 horns, once used to guide the flock, now sounded like conquering trumpets. The entire camp was startled awake, and not knowing how to escape such a terrible invasion from within and without, the soldiers began to fight amongst themselves. My shepherds stood their ground, sounding their horns. The captives were terrified at first, but gradually realized the plan that was in their favor. At daybreak, a scene of total destruction unfolded before our eyes. The entire city was strewn with thousands of bodies torn by their own swords and spears. Only a few managed to flee this field of extermination, but their lives did not last long as they were pursued by my 18 armed allies and apprehended not far from Damascus. Meanwhile, the now liberated captives reclaimed all the riches stolen from them by the enemies. Chapter 5. The Great Liberation. The Great Liberation represents the liberation of Israel in the last days. Abraham discovers that this great liberation was realized during Rosh Hashanah. Abraham begins to preach faith in the Messiah to the liberated captives, inviting them to purify themselves in the water. However, only 3 of them accept. Abraham refuses the offer from the king of Sodom. Abraham and the faithful decide to commemorate the Feast of Tabernacles, dancing upon the pearls of the vessel, joyfully celebrating in Salem and meeting Marquis and death. From the hilltop, as vibrant with the joy of the ex-captives on this morning of liberation, I hear the voice of the key speaking to me amidst the flames. This tangible liberation today represents the liberation I must accomplish in the last days, saving the remnant of your children from the onslaught of many nations allying with Gog to destroy them. On that day, when they triumph over my people, my anger will be great. I will fight them with plague, blood, torrential rains, large hailstones, fire, and sulfur, that I will rain down on them, on their troops, and on their many cities. Thus I will be glorified, justify my holiness, and make myself known to the eyes of many nations. They will know that I am the Lord. On that day I will pour out on the house of David and on the inhabitants of Jerusalem a spirit of grace and supplication. They will look toward me, the one they have pierced, and mourn as one mourns for an only child, weeping bitterly as for a firstborn. On that day, a fountain will be opened for the house of David and the inhabitants of Jerusalem, enabling the removal of sin and impurity. Now aware of the historical significance of this day of liberation, I took a calendar and discovered with surprise that it was Rosh Hashanah, the day of trumpet, the first day of the new year. 10 days later, John would arrive, purifying himself on the Day of Atonement. Day 15 would see the Feast of Tabernacles, the joyous celebration of the autumn harvest. Shortly thereafter, the flame, now for me a representation of the promised Messiah, extinguished at the moment of the encounter between the shepherds and the many now liberated captives, full of joy and wonder. All wanted to know how such a great liberation had been possible only with the use of those torches and horns. I then spoke to them of the importance of that fire liberated from the altar that had guided me to liberate them in that valley, identifying it as the saving Messiah. Seeing that all bore the dirt of slavery on their bodies and cloaks, I invited them to follow me to the Jordan, where they could bathe for purification of their sins. Only 3 accepted the invitation: Lot and his 2 daughters. The others returned home contaminated. Before departing, the king of Sodom came to meet me, promising to give me all the recovered wealth that morning. However, I refused his offer, not wanting it to be said that I had enriched myself from that loot. We remained camped by the Jordan near Jericho for 12 days. During these days of rest, we all rid ourselves of impurities, leaving them in the waters of the Jordan, a special preparation for the Feast of Tabernacles that we decided to commemorate in Salem. Thus, full of joy, we embarked on an upward march toward the city of Salem, unaware of the joyful surprise awaiting us there. I led the way with Lot and his 2 daughters at my side, and behind us came the 300 shepherds guiding the flock. As we advanced, I noticed that my vessel, which had become empty at daybreak, became very heavy. Lowering it, I was surprised to discover it contained many pearls of different sizes and brilliance, mysteriously forming. As we saw the distant white city, we began to hear sounds of a great feast, harmonious chords resounding in the mountains as we advanced along the path. My curiosity to know this city and its young king was immense, for I had already heard of its greatness and renown from many people. Salem was a kingdom unlike any other, where subjects trained not in evil with bows and arrows, but in mastery of musical instruments. Melchizedek, its young king, ruled all with a very special scepter, a lyre for which he had paid a high price. As joy grew within me approaching the city of the great king, we saw a crowd dressed in pure and shining fine linen coming to meet us. All carried musical instruments while singing a hymn of victory. Leading this great crowd was a young man playing a lyre, wearing on his forehead a crown full of precious stones that gleamed under the setting sun. I was certain this was the acclaimed king of Salem. At the moment of our meeting, we were greeted by the reverence they showed by bowing before me. Melchizedek said, "Blessed are you, Abraham, servant of the Most High God, possessor of heaven and earth. And blessed be the Most High God who has delivered your enemies into your hands." Chapter 6. Great Revelations. Chapter 6 unveils great revelations from Melchizedek and his people. The victors are crowned, witnessing a deep emotion as they observe the deep scars on Melchizedek's hands. He promises Abraham to tell him his story. Honored for the breaking of bread and wine, Melchizedek presents the 144 pearls as a tithe. Melchizedek's instructions and prophecies surprise the assembly. Struck by the festive welcome, they enter the city where the beauty of the houses and gardens arouses their admiration. The royal palace, built on Mount Zion, holds a new surprise, the grand throne room adorned with depictions of their victory over the enemies. A long table in the center of the hall is covered with fine linen napkins, adorned with gold threads and gemstones. On this table are 304 crowns, each bearing the name of a victor. Melchizedek, in a surprising gesture, begins to place the crowns on each one's head, starting with Lot and his daughters. Joy and admiration are palpable, but Abraham notices something he hadn't noticed before. Melchizedek's hands bear deep scars. Overwhelmed with gratitude, Abraham prostrates himself at his feet, moved by the gentleness of his hands, bathing them in tears. As he rises, he asks for the meaning of these scars. Melchizedek, with a tender smile, promises to tell him the whole story of his prosperous kingdom and the sacrifices he had to make to achieve its peace. After the coronation, Melchizedek has them seated around the great table and begins to serve them bread and wine. From that moment on, they honor him as the priest of the Most High God. In gratitude, Abraham takes the vase filled with pearls and places it at the king's feet. Melchizedek, taking it in his arms, caresses it, expressing his gratitude for this offering. Melchizedek accepts the vase and decides to take only a tenth of the pearls. Abraham counts the pearls, setting aside the finest ones for the king. There are a total of 1,440 pearls, of which Abraham carefully puts 144 into a small gold box inlaid with precious stones. After receiving the tithe symbolizing the great liberation wrought by the key and the plane, Melchizedek orders one of his subjects, master of ornaments and paintings, to engrave the vase with a beautiful depiction of the moment he offers it. While the vase is being painted, Melchizedek begins to tell Abraham the story of his kingdom, from its foundation to this moment when they commemorate the great victory over the enemies. When he returns the now honored vase with the most beautiful designs and inscriptions extolling justice, humility, and love, the king of Salem asks Abraham to carry it with these pearls for 6 years. He and his shepherds should tell the story of this victorious vase taken from the altar fire and of all those who, with repentance, accept the salvation it represents. They should offer a pearl at the end of the 6 years, but once the pearls are exhausted, there would be no further opportunity for salvation. The 7th year would be a time of great distress and destruction, with protection only for those who possess the pearls. At that time, the cities of the plain would be completely destroyed by the fire of judgment, and other cities that do not repent would be decimated by great plagues. Chapter 7. The Revelations of Melchizedek. Chapter 7 reveals the continuation of Melchizedek's revelations and describes the events that unfold during Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and the Feast of Tabernacles. The 6 years of opportunity begin with the sanctification of the Sabbath as a sign of the covenant with the key. The New Jerusalem is revealed at the end of the 7th year, followed by the advent of the Messiah, the resurrection of the faithful dead, and the transformation of the victorious living. This leads to the crowning of the righteous in the holy city after the recent victory over many enemies. Melchizedek, repeating the words of the Messiah, announces an important sign for those living at the time of the great liberation of Israel. He asserts that the number of columns in his palace, multiplied by the 144 pearls of the tithe, will reveal the year of the fulfillment of the great liberation of Israel. Abraham, intrigued, counts the columns, a total of 40 marble columns adorned with gemstones. Melchizedek uses this calculation to predict future events, including an unprecedented battle and ultimate purification after years of anguish. He describes a day when the harmonious chords of a lyre, played by a descendant of the tribe of Esther, will mark hope amidst the ruins of Salem. On that day, the land of Israel will be heavily shaken, with total destruction of enemy armies. However, those who repent and seek refuge under the wings of the Lord will be saved. Melchizedek predicts a day of purification from impurities for those who accept salvation. It is also the day when the blindness of the sons of Jacob toward the one they have pierced will come to an end. The nations will recognize Yahweh, and the Holy Spirit will be poured out on all flesh. During the Feast of Tabernacles, showers of blessings will fall upon the land, creating a paradise of joy and peace. The chosen ones of God will then understand the words of the book, urging those who seek righteousness to look to the rock from which they were hewn. Over the 6 years of opportunity, all peoples will have the chance to break free from the reign of sin by joining the children of Israel in their purification and the restoration of the kingdom of light. Lucifer, in a gesture of despair, will try to prevent the realization of the divine plan through his people by opposing the sanctification of the Sabbath. During these years of trial, the chosen ones of God will be protected by angels, avoiding the cities condemned to the final 7 plagues. Over the 6 years of the final harvest, the Messiah will build the New Jerusalem, adorned with the righteous deeds of his chosen ones. This New Jerusalem will only be revealed after the fulfillment of all divine justice at the end of the 7th year. At the end of the 7 years, the Messiah will appear in the heavens, accompanied by all the heavenly armies. By sounding his trumpet on the great Rosh Hashanah, all faithful deceased will rise in glory. The victorious living will be transformed instantly, and all the redeemed will be taken to the New Jerusalem. This journey will lead the chosen ones to the holy city, where they will be crowned by the Messiah and sing the song of victory, making the chords of their instruments resonate throughout all space. Chapter 8. The Predictions of Melchizedek. Chapter 8 continues Melchizedek's predictions, with Abraham and his shepherds proclaiming the new redemption represented by the story of the vase and its redeeming flame. The pearls begin to be distributed to believers, offering a period of opportunity before the onset of calamity. However, the pearls of the vase make no sense to Sarah. Melchizedek explains that all the experience we are living is prefigurative, and significant events remain to come for the drama to be fully realized. The first step is to return to the oak of Mamre with the shepherds to proclaim the salvation represented by the story of the vase. Whoever would accept the revealed Messiah with repentance would receive forgiveness of their sins and a pearl. However, after 6 years, the pearls would run out, marking the end of salvation opportunities. At that time, the fire of judgment would fall upon the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, accompanied by terrible plagues for all unbelievers. Abraham, worried for Sarah, fears she might refuse a pearl out of unbelief, jeopardizing her future dreams. Melchizedek comforts Abraham by promising him that after 6 years, God will visit Sarah and deliver her from her barrenness, giving her a son named Isaac. Returning to their tents after the Feast of Tabernacles, Abraham shares the wonderful story of the vase with those they encounter. When they arrive at the oak of Mamre, a crowd awaits them, drawn by the glory of the vase filled with pearls. Abraham and his shepherds proclaim the infinite love of the key revealed by the flame, and the quest for pearls increases each day, filling their hearts with joy. Days, months, and years pass, and the quantity of pearls diminishes with time. However, it is only during the last months of the 6th year that a great concern and anguish invade Abraham's heart. Sarah, despite his constant pleas, shows no interest in a pearl. In these moments of distress, Abraham implores God for Sarah's safeguard, finding his only comfort in the words of Melchizedek, the promise that she will transform at the end of the 6 years. However, with the last days of the 6th year passing, the awareness that time is running out weighs heavily on him, and many people petition him for the pearls of salvation. Abraham's heart is wounded by inexplicable affliction, but despite his anguish, Sarah spurns all his requests, asserting that these pearls hold no meaning for her. Chapter 9. The Visit of the Pilgrims. In Chapter 9, Abraham tries to convince Sarah to receive a pearl, but fails in his attempt. On the same day, 3 pilgrims visit him, and Abraham accepts them as guests. Through them, the Lord converts Sarah and blesses her with a son, now giving her 2 pearls, one for her and the other for the child. Abraham kneels before the Redeemer and receives the last pearl after a sleepless night, where he desperately tried to convince his beloved to take possession of her pearl and accept the salvation it represented. At sunrise on the eve of Rosh Hashanah, Abraham sees that there are only 3 pearls left in the vase. Fearing that others might come to claim them, he feels great anguish. That day, 3 pilgrims head towards their tent. Abraham prays for them to change direction, but his supplications remain unanswered. Feeling bitter, Abraham goes to meet them and invites them in. As he washes their feet and tends to them, he feels compassion seeing their injured feet. However, his heart is filled with peace and joy in understanding that they deserve the pearls more than he does. While washing the feet of the 3rd pilgrim, Abraham finds peace and joy. He imagines the loneliness he would have felt if this pilgrim had not joined the first 2. He realizes that these visitors deserve the pearls more than he, Sarah, and their unborn son. However, Abraham begins to fear that these pilgrims might demand the pearls. As he serves them in silence, they talk about the long journey, the visited cities, and mention Salem, where significant works have been accomplished in preparation for a great feast planned in a year for the Feast of Tabernacles. The words of the 3rd pilgrim, the most talkative, bring a sense of hope to Abraham. His blue eyes remind Abraham of Melchizedek, and he remembers the last promise of the king of Salem. The pilgrim, with a smile, asks Sarah where she will be next year, predicts they will have a son named Isaac, then reveals that he is the flame of the altar fire, the Messiah, the key, who suffered humiliation out of love for his people. After this revelation, the pilgrim blesses Sarah, and Abraham sees scars on his hands similar to those of the king of Salem. With tenderness, the pilgrim speaks to Sarah's heart, pulling her from her unbelief, promising her a glorious future. He gives her 2 pearls, one for her and the other for the unborn Isaac. Sarah, transformed by Yahweh's love, bows before the pilgrim who saved her at the last moment of opportunity. Abraham, seeing Sarah submit, weeps with joy and gratitude. He prostrates himself before his Redeemer and King, who, after comforting them with the assurance of their eternal salvation, gives him the last pearl. Holding it in his hands, a great light of joy and peace penetrates his entire being, and he begins to praise the Lord for the certainty of forever having his dear Sarah and the promised son to come. Chapter 10. Lamentations on the Hill. In chapter 10, Abraham already accompanies the Lord to the hill, from which the Creator sends his 2 companions on a mission. Sometimes Abraham regrets the destruction that will befall the inhabitants of the city from this beautiful valley, and intercedes on behalf of this people. However, there were not even 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah. The Lord's 2 companions are sent to save Lot and his daughters. Abraham bows gratefully before the Lord for his intervention in rescuing his loved ones. After these events, the Lord bids farewell to Sarah and the present shepherds, inviting Abraham to accompany him to the hill overlooking the valley. Arriving there, the Lord separates from his 2 companions, sending them on a special mission to Sodom. From the top of the mountain, they contemplate the fertile valleys and forests stretching on both sides of the Jordan, surrounded by the most prosperous cities, including Sodom and Gomorrah. It is on this hill that a struggle took place between Abraham's shepherds and Lot's, and God offered Lot the opportunity to choose his path. Drawn by the riches of the region, Lot decides to settle there. Seeing his companion remain silent from the sight of the field, Abraham is surprised to see him weep. He asks him the reason for his sadness, and his companion, sobbing, replies that it is a very sad day for him because it is the last time his eyes can gaze upon this fertile valley. The companion weeps for the inhabitants of these cities who do not know that their days are numbered. These tears evoke the memory of the captives liberated 6 years ago, most of whom rejected the purification bath and returned home defiled. Only Lot's daughters accepted salvation by taking possession of their pearls. Thinking of a possible liberation for this people, Abraham asks the Lord if there were at least 50 righteous people in these cities, would they be spared? The Lord replies that if 50 righteous people were present, the whole plain would be forgiven. Abraham continues his inquiries down to the number 10. The Lord tells him that if 10 righteous people were present in these cities, the whole plain would be forgiven. Tormented by an inexplicable agony of the spirit, Abraham weeps bitterly again. Inclining beside his suffering companion, he shares his grief. Abraham is certain that the Lord himself suffers for all those who have traded the love and peace of Salem for the illusions of this valley of destruction. After a long cry, the Lord consoles Abraham by revealing that his 2 companions are at this very moment in Sodom, commissioned to save Lot and his daughters from death. These words bring deep relief to Abraham, who falls gratefully at the feet of the Lord. Chapter 11. Abraham's Mission. In Chapter 11, Abraham receives a mission from Havran to record the entire story of the vase, adding that of Salem, on a parchment that will then be placed inside the vase. This occurs after the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah by Melchizedek, to Abraham's great despair. Havran charged me with the mission, saying, "Take an empty parchment, for the story of the vase and that of Salem are no longer on it, as you heard them from the mouth of Melchizedek. In a year, you and all who accept salvation must go up to Salem for the Feast of Tabernacles. On that day, you will return the vase to the king of Salem, offering him the parchment that contains it as a gift." Obeying Havran's orders, I began to record the story lived by me and my shepherds from the moment I set off to the valley with the vase on my shoulder. The next day, as the sun was already high, mentioning the city of Sodom in the manuscript, I remembered it was the day of its destruction. With a beating heart, I ran over there and was frightened by the scene that lay before my eyes. Instead of that fertile valley resembling a paradise, there was a smoking, lifeless desert. Instead of the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah, there was a deep crater from which the salted waters of the sea dripped. Overwhelmed by this vision of destruction, I returned to the tent, my heart heavy. The memory of so many people being consumed by fire for rejecting divine forgiveness left me deeply weakened. In the days that followed, I could not find the strength to write. Several times I returned to the hill, hoping that all of this was just a nightmare. But instead of the fertile valley, only this chaos remained. It took me several days to regain the spirit to continue writing on the parchment. The story of Salem, written by Abraham, tells how Adonias, tired of the iniquities of the people and inspired by the virtues of his beloved son, built a city to make it a kingdom unlike any other. Shortly after experiencing the joy of victory and the growth of perdition, Melchizedek receives a revelation from an angel, declaring that all the drama he is experiencing has a prophetic meaning, representing past and future events involving the entire vast universe. Chapter 1. The Beginnings of Salem. In Chapter 1, Adonias, a just man seeking to realize his dream of justice and peace, writes on a parchment the laws that will govern a new kingdom, thus marking the beginning of the construction of Salem, a city intended only for pure hearts. This is the story of Salem as I heard it from the mouth of Melchizedek during the Feast of Tabernacles, 15 days after the liberation of Lot and his daughters. It all began with a dream in the heart of a man named Adonias, who, though possessing much wealth, valued nothing as much as the justice and peace stemming from wisdom and love. Tired of the injustices prevailing throughout the land of Canaan, Adonias decided to build a kingdom governed by laws of love and justice. The capital of this kingdom would be called Salem, the city of peace. The subjects of Salem would not wield bows or arrows, but would be trained in the art of music. Every inhabitant of Salem would always have at their disposal a musical instrument to express through it the peace and joy of this new kingdom, forming together a powerful orchestra in the fight against discord born of pride and selfishness. The first step of Adonias towards the realization of his plan was to draft the laws of the new kingdom, which he wrote on a parchment. The subjects of Salem could not lie, steal, hate, or kill their fellow beings. Pride and selfishness were designated as the cause of all evils, and therefore could not exist in this place of peace. The laws of the parchment required the practice of humanity, sincerity, friendship, and above all, love, which is the greatest of virtues. After recording on the parchment the laws that would govern the kingdom, Adonias began to plan the architecture of Salem. Although the city was small at first, it would have chambers for 200 people. The chosen construction site was a high region of Canaan, west of the Mount of Olives. In a short time, the realization of Adonias attracted people from all over the world, curious to see the palaces and manors under construction in the new city. Admired for the beauty of this white city, visitors did not fail to ask about its future inhabitants. Adonias then showed them the parchment and explained that Salem was intended for pure hearts, ready to obey its laws. Chapter 2. Completion of Salem's construction. Chapter 2 marks the conclusion of the construction of the city of Salem. Melchizedek, the inspiration of his father, Adonias, finally sees the fruit of his labor. Adonias, on the other hand, begins to seek to honor a particular individual, and it is then that Benzama, a reflection of the virtues of a prince, Samael, is honored. The construction of the city is finally completed, and Salem is revealed as beautiful as the adorned bride awaiting her groom. Adonias, seated on his throne, begins to examine the numerous candidates for the status of subjects who flock from all sides. Only those who promise fidelity to the laws are approved, receiving thus 3 gifts from the king: the right to a dwelling, fine linen garments, and a musical instrument on which they must practice. The city is finally filled with inhabitants, and Adonias, overflowing with joy, convenes all to an inaugural feast in honor of Salem. At this feast, he proclaims a decree that will determine the future of the kingdom. He announces that from this day forward, which is the 10th of the 7th month, 6 years will be counted. During these 6 years, all inhabitants will be tested. Only those who remain loyal and progress in practicing the laws of the parchment will be confirmed as heirs of this kingdom of peace. Those bound by guilt and transgression will be deposed by judgment. The king's words incite all to a deep examination of the heart, rejoicing in the assurance that they will emerge victorious over pride and selfishness, the roots of all evil. Adonias has a unique son, Melchizedek, whose beauty, tenderness, and wisdom have been the inspiration for the construction and foundation of the kingdom. Melchizedek, only 12 years old at the inauguration of Salem, is destined to be crowned king at the end of the 6 years of testing. His charm, virtues, and sympathy make him dear to all the inhabitants of Salem. He is considered the one who possesses all the virtues necessary to be the king of a victorious Salem. On the other hand, Adonias built a special mansion next to the palace for the sole purpose of offering it to the individual whose life best expresses the laws of the parchment. He monitors the inhabitants daily, seeking the one he wishes to honor. One day, as the king walks through the alleys of Salem, he hears a voice resembling that of his son. Turning to see who it could be, he discovers a handsome young man singing a song. Seeing the radiance of wisdom and purity on his face, Adonias rejoices, believing he has found someone he could honor. This young man, a faithful copy of the prince, is called Samael. Placing a ring on his finger, the king leads him to the palace, where he is welcomed by Melchizedek, who offers him many gifts, including the right to always be by his side. Adonias organizes a grand banquet in honor of Samael, to which all are invited. Seeing him by the king's side, the subjects cheer with joy, recognizing in him the true prince. When Melchizedek appears and places him with a smile at his father's right during the banquet, Samael is honored by all. He is truly worthy to receive a place in the mountain dwelling, as he perfectly reflects the virtues that crown the beloved prince. Chapter 3. The sublime compositions of Melchizedek inspire acts of kindness and peace among the people. His music preserves harmony and peace. Samael becomes Melchizedek's inseparable companion, and important revelations are made by Adonias to his people about the future government of a victorious Salem. Shammah, the guardian of the laws, sees Salem grow in happiness and peace. With joy, the subjects gather each day at dawn to listen to Melchizedek's sublime compositions, which inspire acts of kindness and peace. Among the friendships born and strengthened through harmonious music, the one between the prince and Azam stands out. Since he began residing in the mountain dwelling, Samael has become the constant companion of the prince. Together, They spend long hours meditating on the laws of the parchment, eliciting great admiration from the loyal subject who sees Adonias' son transform these laws into beautiful songs, whose sweet melodies emanate from his lips like the scent of a flower. The prince, in addition to singing, devotes himself to instrumental music, with the lute becoming his favorite instrument. Through it, he manages to express with greater perfection the richness of his soul. After 5 of the 6 years of testing, Adonias, happy to see that all the inhabitants of Salem have remained faithful to the principles of the parchment, summons them to a banquet for important revelations. As they take their seats before the throne, the subjects join joyfully in singing peace songs led by Samuel. Moved to tears by their performance, the king goes to his son, embracing him amidst the applause of the grateful crowd. All acknowledge that peace and joy in Salem are largely due to the love and dedication of the beloved prince, author of these sweet songs. In this moment of recognition and gratitude, Adonias reveals his plans kept secret until now. With a calm voice, he tells the subjects of this kingdom of peace, "My soul is filled with joy today, as I contemplate your faces more radiant than in times past. Your garments remain as white and pure as the day I gave them to you, and the harmony of your voices and instruments is even better today." The king solemnly adds, "There is still 1 year of testing left, at the end of which you will be examined. If you remain faithful, as you have been so far, you will be honored and confirmed as subjects of this kingdom of peace. However, if anyone is found guilty, they will be exiled, although the trial may bring us much sadness and suffering." The king's words prompt the subjects to deep reflection, each examining themselves reverently. They confidently wonder if they will be approved, for they love Salem and its laws. They then unite their voices in an expressive chant of loyalty. At the end of the song, Adonias reveals his great secret. "Those who are approved and inherit this kingdom of peace will see my son become king, to whom I will give the glorified throne of this victorious Salem." The king's announcement is greeted by all with great joy. However, Adonias has not yet revealed all of his plan. Calling for silence, he continues, "My son will have a special scepter in which all right of dominion will be sealed. His scepter, symbolizing all harmony, will be a lute." This revelation deeply moves all present, and the prince, prostrating himself at his father's feet, weeps for joy. Meanwhile, all applaud him enthusiastically, longing to see the day when peace will be victorious. Adonias, calling Shammah to him to be with his son, concludes by saying, "In the government of this victorious Salem, I intend to make Samael II, after Melchizedek. The parchment of the laws will be entrusted to him, and he must be the guardian of the honor of this triumphant kingdom." Chapter 4. Shammah is overcome by feelings of greatness and pride, thus orchestrating a secret plan to impose his concepts contrary to the law of the parchment. Melchizedek manages to bring him back on the path of humility and righteousness, but Samael falls again under the yoke of pride and greed. Samael, upon learning of Agonias's plans for Salem's future, is filled with euphoria. He now envisions this city like no other, imagining its future glory. Considering the king's words that would place him as second in the kingdom, he is overwhelmed by a sense of exaltation. This individual, who had until then led a life of humility by obeying the laws of the parchment, begins to take pride in his position. In his delirium, he imagines himself alongside the throne with the subjects of Salem at his feet, praising his greatness with accolades. Samael, completely engulfed by this feeling, fails to realize that he is being led down a dangerous path. The pride that seduces him breeds selfishness, which will later manifest as greed. A week after Agonias's revelation, the subjects organize a celebration in honor of Melchizedek, the future king of Salem. Seeing him acclaimed by so much praise, Samael is overwhelmed by a strange feeling of envy, born of pride and selfishness. He cannot bear the thought of being left behind, convinced that he is not as beautiful and wise as the prince. It is almost impossible for him to conceal this feeling of unhappiness. Though Samael once found indescribable pleasure in reciting the laws of the parchment in the company of the prince to transform them into beautiful songs, these moments are now unpleasant to him. The principles he once recited now contradict his own ideals. However, he decides not to reveal his feelings of rebellion. He will uphold the old parchment until, with his authority, he can exclude the new laws of the upcoming kingdom. For is he not the guardian of these laws? Believing he can influence Adonias' son with his dreams of greatness, Samael approaches him with euphoria. Speaking of the glories of the kingdom to come, he imagines himself, with the prince, covered in honors, enjoying the praises of a victorious Salem, becoming the heroes of the most perfect kingdom established among men. The delirious words of this honest subject arouse concern and sadness in the heart of the young prince, as they do not reflect the teachings of love and humility of the parchment. Seeing his intimate friend in danger, Melchizedek, with a tenderness never before revealed, leads him to the throne. Taking the parchment, he begins to compassionately read the following paragraphs. The kingdom of Salem will affirm itself in humility, for this virtue is the foundation of all true greatness. Humility is the fruit of love, for it opposes pride which can keep the creature captured in the dust, making it content with its limitations, by tricking it into thinking they are of infinite value. Humility consists of forgetting oneself, which in a life of selfless service to others. Upon hearing this, Samael strives to conceal his indignation during the reading of the parchment. Then the prince, in a friendly counsel, says to him, "My dear friend Rain, shall we create in a victorious hall that will shine far above this parchment, whose principles have been faithfully fulfilled during these years of trial? Is not the glory of Salem full freedom? Know well that full freedom will not coexist with those laws, whose purpose is enclosed at the end of 5 years. It is up to us to crown Salem with the honor of total freedom that will generate endless happiness. This freedom cannot exist under the limitations of the parchment." The king's son is deeply troubled by his friend's words, which seem nonsensical. But how could he free him from this path of death? No one in Salem, besides Melchizedek, knew of Samael's sad condition. Thus, with patience, the prince tries to make him understand the true value of the parchment, whose laws could never be altered, for it would bring about the end of all peace. The prince's counsel eventually awakens Samael's heart. Meditating on his words, he realizes he is following a deceptive path. Seeing tears of repentance in the eyes of the one he loves so much, Adonias' son rejoices in his victory over pride and selfishness. The days following the release were filled with success. The prince showed even more kindness, ready to give all of himself so that his companion could continue to triumph on the path of humility. During these days of joy, he was honored to know the scepter being forged. In a moment of inattention, Samael, who had regained peace in his mind, let his heart be possessed again by a feeling of greatness that triggered a new storm in his soul. This feeling, mixed with pride and greed, seized him as soon as the prince showed him the golden lute on which was imprinted the seal of the entire domain. Chapter 5. Samael begins to contemplate conquest plans, preaching to the subjects a false and deceitful doctrine. Adonias, perceiving this rebellion, reaffirms the accuracy of the laws of the parchment for peace and true freedom. Faced with this, Melchizedek offers forgiveness and the opportunity to return to righteousness, but by this stage, Samael has already secretly gathered with his followers, revealing his conquest plan. From his abode, Samael observes Salem in its morning splendor. Seeing it, adorned like a bride awaiting her king, greed in its delirium begins to formulate conquest plans. He believes that, already elevated on the throne and holding the precious scepter in his hands, all would see him as the liberator from the oppression of the laws of the parchment. At his command, Salem would become a kingdom of total freedom and pleasure. Dominated by greed, he begins to elaborate his conquest plans. Samael was intelligent, so he decided to act subtly among the subjects. He would start by showing them inaccuracies in the parchment, acting with apparent kindness and showing a growing interest in everyone's happiness. Later, he would begin to visit the subjects in their homes, speaking to them about the glories of the kingdom to come, where they would enjoy total freedom. His influence in Salem grew exorbitantly, and all admired him for his beauty and wisdom, considering him a perfect apostle of justice and love. But nobody could imagine that amid this atmosphere of joy and gratitude, a subtle trap was laid, into which many would fall unsuspectingly. Samael did not openly speak against the parchment, but devoted himself to praising it for accomplishing a trial mission over these 6 years about to end. In his logic, in the forthcoming kingdom, when all would be approved, they would be above the laws. His seemingly correct arguments allowed him to openly assert that, in the new kingdom, the existence of the parchment would be an obstacle to achieving true freedom. The seeds of rebellion sown by Samael quickly sprouted in the hearts of many Salem residents. This occurred 6 months after Lion Kippur, when the fate of all would be sealed. 1/3 of the inhabitants, seduced by the dreadful deception, now glorified him, showing total disdain for the laws and the prince they deemed obsolete. Adonias, suffering from the emergence of this rebellion, convened the subjects to an emergency meeting. The faces of all present showed contrasting dispositions. With a calm voice, the king began to reveal to them, as never before, the crucial importance of the laws recorded in the parchment, showing how they would be the foundation of all prosperity and peace in the kingdom. He emphasized that all happiness and glory gained would instantly fade away, leading all into chaos if they were eliminated. After demonstrating the necessity of submission to the laws, Melchizedek, animated by a strong desire to save those he loved so much, held up the parchment before all. With a voice full of kindness, he offered them forgiveness and the opportunity to start anew on the path to peace. His words moved everyone, even initially motivating Samael. However, pride prevented him from repenting again. The once honored, honest subject hardened in his rebellion and decided to continue to the end. This decision would not manifest quickly, as he had idealized a treacherous plan. At the end of the meeting, Samael summoned his supporters to a secret meeting held under the cover of night near the brook of Cedron, outside the walls of Salem. After cursing the parchment and all who defended it, he laid out his plans of revenge and betrayal to them. As you know, the 6 years of trial are coming to an end, with from today 24 weeks until the day of coronation. If you want to see me as king instead of Melchizedek, I can steal the scepter, thus taking possession of the kingdom. Then we will all march together into the deep valley where the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah lie. There, we will arm ourselves and march against Salem, subduing our enemies. We will put an end to the parchment and all those who refuse to submit to our rule. Chapter 6. Samael and his accomplices feign loyalty to the kingdom. Melchizedek, trusting, shows Samael the secret location of the golden lute. Samael betrays Melchizedek's trust and, preparing his men, steals the precious scepter. Samael and his supporters begin to march toward the valley. Salem is in danger, and days of apparent tranquility and peace follow. Samael, pretending loyalty, is still by the prince's side, showing admiration for his new compositions that exalt the laws of the parchment. Samael's supporters also unite their voices in praise, expressing the greatness of the principles they abhor. Melchizedek, joyful to see the day of his coronation approaching, rehearses with the subjects the victory chants he has specially composed for the occasion. Speaking joyfully of his dreams of greatness, he prepares for a life increasingly honored through his beauty and harmony. Samael, in his hidden malice, mocks the prince by foreseeing the pain that betrayal will cause him. During these days of apparent peace, the rebellious subject asks where the scepter will be hidden until the day of coronation. Unwittingly, the prince reveals the entire secret. Shortly before dusk, Samael leaves the palace where he has spent the entire day by the prince's side. Heading towards his abode, he greets the darkness with an evil laugh. As the subjects, enchanted by the anticipation of imminent victory, inspect under the candlelight the adornments of their instruments, their garments, and their abodes, Samael feigns preparation in peaceful appearance. Meanwhile, the prince, sleepless after a night of beautiful dreams, prepares for the judgment and coronation ceremony. Melchizedek, dressed in a special robe of fine linen adorned with gold threads and precious stones, heads southward of Salem. He summons all subjects to the judgment meeting. The subjects emerge from their abodes, carrying with them their musical instruments. When they gather with the faithful, Melchizedek is surprised by the absence of many familiar faces. This mysterious absence causes him deep pain, but he also does not see the face of his dearest friend, Sham, among the faithful. Worried, the prince sets out to search for the missing and eventually heads towards the mountain abode. Calling out to Sham, his voice echoes back with no response but empty echoes. Betrayal reads in the sad void, and the prince feels tears welling up within him. Memories of the shared past with the one he sought with such devotion flood back to him. Remembering the days when he rejoiced in the certainty that his friend would not fall again, he recalled the friendly gesture of showing the tragedy. The memory of that incident, coupled with the footsteps unheard in the palace that night, confirms the certainty that Salem is in danger. Unable to bear the possibility of betrayal, he prostrates himself in tears, pained by the terrible ingratitude of the one to whom he has dedicated so much love. Bent by the pain, he remains for a moment, seeking some solace. Eventually he wipes away his tears, determined to make any sacrifice to restore the glory and power of Salem. Raising the scepter from the hands of rebellion, comforted by the certainty of victory, Melchizedek returns to the side of the faithful subjects. Concealing his suffering as the reason for the absence of so many, the prince devotes himself to guiding the triumphant march back to the palace. Chapter 7. The faithful subjects, ignorant of the betrayal, sing in triumph awaiting the coronation of their king. However, the ceremony is interrupted by the absence of the scepter, which distresses all. Melchizedek comforts them by promising to retrieve the precious scepter and sets out in search of it. Shammah, filled with anger, scratches the inscriptions engraved on the scepter. Melchizedek faces multiple dangers on his quest for the scepter, but he is preserved by divine glory. They ascend the white steps of Mount Zion, followed by the triumphant crowd. Inside the palace, Melchizedek stands before a magnificent throne awaiting his young king. At the base of this throne, the parchment of laws is already open amidst a floral arrangement, and beside it sits a beautiful crown of gold and gemstones, along with the case of the scepter that symbolizes all of Salem's harmony. The subjects are joyful, for they know they will be judged worthy to inherit the kingdom of peace. Now awaiting the moment of coronation, Melchizedek will rule from his throne with his precious scepter. Amidst triumphant singing, amidst the applause of the victorious troops, Melchizedek turns to his father, who receives him with a warm embrace. This moment is truly solemn, silencing the crowds awaiting the coronation, where the case would open, and all would witness the exaltation of the beloved prince. However, upon opening the case carefully, Adonias discovers it is empty. Joy on his face gives way to an expression of indescribable concern and sadness. The presence of the missing scepter saddens Melchizedek and the subjects, who should be sharing this moment with their friends. Melchizedek comforts them by promising that he will go in search of the scepter. Ignorant of the risks awaiting the prince, the subjects watch him depart hastily. The day of coronation approaches for the distant rebels of Salem, and Samael, on the way to the cities of the plain, damages the precious loot adorned with the inscriptions of the laws. As they reach the point where the road divides, Samael orders his followers to continue to Gomorrah, while he would go to Sodom, where he would stay for 2 days, joining them later in the night. Entering Sodom, Samael walks through the narrow streets unnoticed until he finds an isolated house on an elevation. Using the scepter as a weapon, he invades the house, killing its sleeping occupants. He takes possession of this residence where he schemes a loan for the sale of Salem. Meanwhile, at dawn, initially the day of coronation, Adonias' son walks towards the valley, his eyes filled with sadness and anxiety, seeking traces of the rebels. Memories of the ingratitude of those he loved so much make him weep, his tears seeming like drops of blood from a wounded heart. The prince does not weep for the dangers that await him that night, but for the unfortunate fate of those who have exchanged the peace of Salem for the violence of these cities of the plain. His only comfort is the memory of those who, despite all temptations, remained faithful, to whom he promised to return the scepter, a promise he will keep despite all sacrifices. After a long night of insomnia, the prince, lying on the side of the road, sees the decisive daylight near Sodom that morning. The idea of approaching the center of his beloved Salem makes him forget all fatigue, and he hastens his steps towards the challenge. As the great gate of the city opens, they are seized with fear upon hearing discordant noises that betray the pride, selfishness, and greed that dominate all hearts in this city. Melchizedek, determined and hopeful, passes through the gates of Sodom, plunging into this strange world where everything is contrary to Salem. From the rough and filthy constructions of Sodom, it is evident that it is a kingdom of darkness. The contrasting presence of the prince is quickly noticed by many who surround him tumultuously, filled with horror, recoiling as if vanquished by an invisible force. Driven by fury, they begin to pursue him from afar, determined to make him flee, hurling stones and mud to soil his garments. But they do not reach him as he advances in his anxious quest. Eventually, they give up the pursuit at sunset. Chapter 8. Melchizedek retrieves the precious scepter destroyed by Samael, but maintains a princely posture in the face of the traitor's threats. His determination to redeem the scepter at any cost remains firm, even when confronted with pain and blood as the price of his redemption. Melchizedek's atonement to redeem the scepter is akin to Christ's atonement to redeem humanity. As the sun declined on the horizon, heralding the arrival of night, his heart suffered great agony. Almost overcome by exhaustion and despair in a dark impasse, he bowed his head and, fainting amidst tears, uttered these words amid sobs. "Salem, you cannot perish. Your scepter must be redeemed with the claws of rebellion. But when and where will I find it? I have no more strength within me, and the hope of redeeming it before nightfall forsakes me." In his supreme anguish, the prince did not notice that on this evening another wail of pain emanated from the broken strings of a humiliated lute. Suddenly, this faint wail penetrated his ears, reviving him with the certainty that the great moment of redemption had arrived. Wiping away his tears, he gathered his strength and headed towards a small house on a hill from where the sound seemed to come. Approaching the slightly ajar door, he stopped, contemplating a scene of contrast. Samael, wrapped in a dirty cloak, punishing the scepter of Salem. Both the youth and the scepter were so disfigured that there was hardly any trace left of their former glory. However, the scepter remained precious, as it bore the seal of Salem's dominion. Faced with this heart-wrenching sight, Melchizedek was deeply moved, bursting into loud sobs. The seditious one, surprised to see no expression of fear in Melchizedek's eyes, but rather compassion, rose trembling and full of anger, demanding of him, "What brings you to Sodom?" pointing to the damaged scepter. Melchizedek exclaimed, "The glory of Salem is destroyed by your betrayal, for you have exchanged the house of justice and love for this valley of injustice, hatred, and death. Now, if you do not wish to return to Salem, at least return the scepter. I have descended this hostile valley ignorant of the dangers that await us, knowing your intent, and wish to save Salem." Ignoring Samael's insults, the prince, moved by infinite anguish, did not perceive that on this evening another wail of pain emanated from the broken strings of a humiliated lute. At that moment, Samael felt frustrated in his attempts to intimidate him, considering abandoning his mission due to the prince's dignified silence. However, his pride instantly prevailed. He then began to plan something terrible to further humiliate and inflict suffering on the prince. Mockingly, he said, "The scepter of Salem can be yours if you manage to pay me the price of your liberation." The prince asked him with a gleam in his eyes, "What is the price, Samael?" With a sly smile, Samael replied slowly, "The price is neither gold nor silver, but pain and blood. You must completely strip yourself of your garments, lie down on the ground, endure blows until sunset. If you are willing to submit without resistance, the scepter will be entirely yours." Trembling at such a cruel proposition, Adonias' son looked at the sun, distant on a cloud. An intense struggle began in his heart. Initially, the horror of the sacrifice almost overwhelmed him, prompting him to withdraw. But the thought of seeing Salem enslaved by rebellion ultimately led him to decide to pay the price of redemption by surrendering to humiliating suffering. Having made the firm decision to redeem the scepter, the prince threw his garments on a stone, immediately lay down on the cold ground, his face turned to the west. Without mercy, Samael began to strike him, using the scepter itself as an instrument of torture. Groaning in pain, the prince kept his gaze fixed on the sun, which seemed to pause on a cloud. Dazed by the pain, he finally saw the sun set, buoyed by the proximity of victory. Murmuring low and determinedly, he said, "Jerusalem, Salem, from now on you shall hold in your embrace a precious scepter which, in my hands, shall become an instrument of justice and peace." Hearing this promise uttered amidst groans, Samael, furious, shouted at him, "Your suffering shall not bring dawn to Salem, for your hands shall never touch the scepter after this affront." Samael seized a sharp stone, preparing to deliver the final blows. However, as he thought of Salem's imminent victory, Melchizedek felt his right arm pinned under Samael's feet. This brutal gesture was followed by a blow that made him writhe in agony. His hand had been cruelly lacerated, and a copious flow of blood poured from the gaping wound. The same violence then descended upon his left hand. Unable to bear the agony inflicted by these tearing blows, Adonias's son, bloodied, sank into the darkness of unconsciousness. Chapter 9. Shammah, because of his actions, abandons the prince, leaving the scepter by his side. Gradually, Melchizedek regains consciousness, retrieves his garments and scepter, then makes an oath before departing definitively towards what he calls him. He does not regret his actions. There is a great similarity between Melchizedek's experiences and those that the incarnated Son of God would undergo. Melchizedek is welcomed with acclaim for his redeeming act, is embraced by his loving Father, and returns the scepter to be restored. When he ceased striking the prince, the rebellious subject was seized by a strange horror as he beheld the face of one who had only done him good and seemed to be plunged in the sleep of death. He tried not to remember his past, but felt irresistibly drawn to the days of his happy innocence in Salem. He recalled his best friend's constant counsel, urging him to forsake the path of evil that would lead to misery. As he was carried away in these memories of happiness destroyed by his own fault, Samael became aware of his ingratitude. Horrified by what he had done, he bent over Melchizedek's bloodied body and despaired to see him lifeless. Unable to bear the weight of great guilt, he quickly left that place, hiding under the darkness of the cold night. After the deep swoon, the prince began to regain consciousness amidst deliriums that transported him to the heart of his beloved Salem. He relived moments lived and dreamed, where he joyfully beheld his best friend's face, reaching out with a smile. But his gesture was thwarted by deep pain. Amidst the cheers of victorious subjects, receiving the scepter from his father's hands, he felt an irresistible pain in his hands. With these dreams frustrated by pain, he woke up to reality, finding himself naked, wounded, and alone in a dangerous place, far from Salem's protection and affection. But even more painful was the thought that all this was the retribution of the one who had been the recipient of all the gifts of his love. Unable to move considering the great betrayal, he began to cry without comfort. He lamented not his own pain, but the fall of those who had exchanged Salem's love and justice for contempt and hatred, sentiments that would ultimately reduce them to ashes in this cursed valley. Through tears, the prince observed the sky where a cloak tinged with blood spread in the light of the setting sun. He then remembered the loot for which he had paid such a high price. Where was it in its desperate flight? Samael had left it abandoned near Melchizedek's wounded body. When he saw it, he forgot all pain and embraced it with his wounded hands, caressing the ruined convex part with a smile. He said, "You are mine again. I have redeemed you with my blood." On the other hand, Samael, overcome by a strange horror, had fled after committing the heinous crime. Suddenly, he stopped just a step from the gate of Sodom, where, impelled by pride, he repented with indignation of his weakness. For after achieving such a great victory, it was not his plan to destroy Salem's kingdom to establish his own. Suddenly remembering the scepter, he wondered why he had left it abandoned near the corpse of that hated prince. He retraced his steps to retrieve it. Melchizedek, gathering his meager strength, staggered towards where he had left his garments. Then, after dressing and clutching his precious scepter to his chest, Adonaiah's son made a deeply emotional oath before leaving that place of suffering. Caressing the scepter, he said, "My dear scepter, you were created as an emblem of harmony from justice and love. All of Salem's glory rests upon you. When rebellion enslaved you, dragging you into this hostile valley, you were wounded and humiliated, becoming an instrument of impiety in the hands of the tyrant. However, I have redeemed you with my blood. Now our wounds will be healed, and soon we shall be crowned amidst the praises of a victorious Salem. When this dream becomes reality, we shall witness together the end of all that stands against us to harm us, where Shammah and his followers shall be devoured by the fire that shall reduce Sodom and Gomorrah to ashes." After making his solemn oath, the young prince, already hidden in the darkness of the night, left that hill, leaving behind the traces of his suffering. Since the departure of the king's son, promising to return with the scepter, Salem lived through moments of unspeakable anxiety, for amidst the tears, the king and other subjects reminisced about all that happy past, broken by the rebels' ingratitude. But what tortured them most was the absence of the prince and the scepter, upon which all the splendor of the kingdom of peace was overshadowed. Thus, eager to comfort the hearts of the subjects, Melchizedek advanced through the night towards the mountains surrounding Salem. Though still weakened and wounded, he continued his upward march, hoping to reach his homeland by morning. This long and dark night was finally overcome by the rays of dawn. In Salem, the hope of seeing Melchizedek again with his scepter was almost abandoned until, gazing upon the Mount of Olives, they saw him descending by the path of Gethsemane. When they found him at the bottom of the Kidron Valley, they were frightened by his appearance. His face was pale and his robe was soaked in blood, yet he smiled, expressing great joy. They then asked him the reason for these bloodstains, and in response, Melchizedek withdrew his wounded hands from under his cloak, showing them the redeemed scepter between them. After recounting the steps that led him to save the scepter, the subjects in silence respectfully bowed at his feet, acclaiming him as their Redeemer and King. Amidst the praises of the redeemed hosts, the prince entered the royal palace, where, under the care of his loving father, he recovered from past suffering. Furthermore, the disfigured scepter, now more precious, was also restored, becoming even more beautiful than before. Now, the day of the coronation would be set for the following day by the grace of Melchizedek, which would seal the victory of all the faithful and the condemnation of the rebels. Chapter 10. Shammah, finding neither the prince's body nor the scepter, sets out for Sodom and is received as a king by his men, whose numbers increase every day in iniquity and pride. While terror conspired against the kings of the plain, inciting them to war against other kings, Samael and his men, defeated, hid in caves. Shortly after Melchizedek's departure, Samael arrived at the place where he had apparently left the lifeless prince near the Ud. Not understanding this mysterious disappearance, he headed towards Gomorrah, where his followers awaited him. When he saw them, he proclaimed his victory over the hated prince and the scepter he had slaughtered in Sodom, crushing all hope for the followers of the parchment. His words amplified the rebel crowd, who began to celebrate the conquest by mocking justice and love, exalting Shammah as the victorious king. Now all desired to obtain weapons with the aim of advancing, consolidating the final blow by uniting with them many criminals in their evil intentions. These criminals were welcomed as masters in the art of handling bows and arrows. In their madness, Samael ordered the expulsion of all calendars, for in his kingdom of freedom they would not be subject to any time account. The laws of morality were also excluded, leading to total chaos. This disorder was most clearly manifested by a shrill and cacophonous noise that they proclaimed as the new dominant music. Dominated by selfishness, Samael and his followers feasted on illusions, unaware that their days were numbered, for the fruits of rebellion would soon draw upon them the fire of destruction. Dividing their followers into small groups, Shammah began to command violent acts that terrorized the inhabitants of the plains. At that time, they hid in caves near the Dead Sea. The respect and fear of Samael's warriors caused the kings of 4 cities to finally seek him out, proposing peace agreements among themselves. These were the kings of Sodom, Berza, the king of Gomorrah, Senado, the king of Adama, CMB, the king of Sebolim, and the Lord king of Vela. At that time, these kings paid tribute according to the honor agreement with the king of Lam, who, accompanied by the armies of 4 other cities, had subjected them in the valley near the Dead Sea. With these alliances, Samael became much bolder in his actions, bringing terror and destruction to the territories of distant cities. However, the armies of Cordoba, or Moor, and their allies, already furious at Samael's provocations, marched against the 4 kings, defeating them again in the valley of Desidim, and taking the inhabitants of Sodom captive, among whom was Lot, my nephew. As the anger of the 5 kings approached, Samael and his followers hid in caves north of the Dead Sea. Chapter 11. Shammah prepares to conquer Salem and lays out his espionage plan along his way to Sal. Memories torment him as he beholds before him a Salem more beautiful and magnificent than before. Various events unfold on the day of the coronation. The 12 months of the great sacrifice were about to end. Now the scepter was fully restored, shining in its case, and the prince, equally recovered from his past wounds, rejoiced in anticipation of the Yom Kippur of his coronation. During his wait, he dedicated himself to composing beautiful songs, expressing his love for Salem. Throughout these 12 months, the city of peace adorned itself like a bride for the grand coronation day. A week before Yom Kippur, Shammah, totally unaware that the day of his judgment was approaching, gathered all his followers and announced to them that his next mission would be the conquest of Salem. Before advancing, he would go alone to check the city's vulnerable points. After being applauded by the crowd, Shammah set out on a reconnaissance mission. As he advanced alone, he tried to push from his mind all the moments that filled him with terror due to guilt. However, he was inevitably drawn into memories of that mountain of cruel tortures. His past suddenly came rushing back to him like a weight collapsing. When he woke from those memories, he could not shake. Night had fallen, the darkness around him foreboding a somber end. Faced with discouragement, he tried to find joy in recalling the army awaiting him, ready to follow his orders to the letter in the conquest of Salem. Little did he know it was the morning of Yom Kippur, and his judgment had arrived. Upon reaching the summit of the Mount of Olives, Shammah was surprised to see that the city was more beautiful than before, adorned entirely with branches and flowers, like a maiden awaiting her betrothed. However, Salem seemed deserted, with no signs of life in its dwellings. What he was unaware of was that all remnants of this kingdom were hidden in the grand hall of the palace, awaiting Melchizedek's glorious coronation. Imagining himself elevated on the abandoned throne, surrounded by a victorious army at his feet, the rebel entered the city and hurried towards the palace. But when he crossed the gate leading to the main hall, he was filled with astonishment at the sight of the multitude of faithful gathered there. On a golden table adorned with flowers carved from precious stones sat the empty throne, with at its base the parchment of laws, a crown of gold adorned with gemstones, and the case that had been left empty on that night of betrayal. Not understanding the riddle, Shammah hid behind a pillar and, fearing recognition, continued to observe. The subjects, with expressions of joyful anticipation, gazed towards the empty throne. But where did all this joy come from? They had lost their king with the scepter. Baffled by this, Shammah saw his thoughts interrupted by the applause of the crowd towards Adonias, who approached the throne. With a voice full of emotion for the victory, he announced that the coronation dream had become reality. A cry of triumph echoed through the air when, in response to his father's call, the beloved prince entered and made his way to the throne. It was then that upon seeing him covered in a cloak of glory, Shammah was seized with terrible fear and attempted to flee. However, the gates of the grand hall were closed from the outside. As the coronation ceremony began, it was truly solemn. Adonias, with a respectful gesture, took the rich crown and placed it upon his son's brow. Then, after bowing towards the case, he opened it carefully to retrieve the restored loot, whose beauty and radiance were far superior to its initial condition. Seated on the throne amidst the acclaim of the subjects, Melchizedek began to play the scepter, drawing chords of great harmony and peace. All fell silent to listen to his new compositions, expressing his deep love for the scepter and the entire kingdom of peace. A great emotion filled the hearts of all at that moment, bringing them to tears. Shammah, unable to react, was utterly tormented by these chords, for they revived lost opportunities and inflicted terrible torture upon his conscience. Melchizedek had composed for this special moment songs that described the highlights of Salem's history. But when he began to sing about the friendship he had with Shammah, his voice broke due to the tears he could not contain. It was sad for him to sing about the downfall of one who had been his best friend. So, he sang about the high price he had to pay to reclaim the scepter, which represented the honor of Salem. Watching those scarred hands play with such mastery and affection, the restored scepter, the subjects, overcome with emotion, prostrated themselves in tears, seeing in Melchizedek's hands the lute that, in Shammah's hands, had been an instrument of torture. Samael understood too late how far he had strayed from the prince's counsel. How many times had those hands upon which he had unleashed all that violence reached out in an effort to save him, but he had simply disregarded them. And now, it was too late. Terribly too late. Chapter 12. Proclamation of the Jubilee and Coronation of Melchizedek. The sealing of citizenship for the faithful. Summer presents herself and challenges the king. The trial against Samael and his followers begins. The triumphant subjects who had been reverently guided through all this past of happiness, betrayal, pain, and triumph, united to give voice to a joyful proclamation. True and just are your principles, O King of Salem. You are worthy to reign with glory and majesty among the lords of your faithful, for through your sacrifice you have liberated us from the threats of darkness, bringing forth in our hearts the joy of the dawn. This exultant chant was followed by the ceremony confirming all the faithful in their victory, where Adonias' son, with his redeemed scepter, began to seal each person present with a special touch, thus forming a long line of exalted faithful. The confirmed subjects, receiving the king's approval gesture, positioned themselves to the right of the throne, where they awaited the confirmation of others. The joy-filled, illuminated gazes accompanying the sealing of the last righteous suddenly fell upon the strange figure of Samael, who, dominated by an irresistible force, walked despondently toward the throne. His appearance was horrifying, his face distorted by evil, his clothes dirty and foul-smelling, making him so repulsive that no one recognized him in the shadow of the subjects. Melchizedek rose from his throne as if struck by great pain. From his lips the subjects heard a painful exclamation, "Samael! Samael!" The pitiful figure of the once most beautiful filled everyone with sadness, bringing them to tears. Amid murmurs they lamented, knowing that Samael's fate and that of all who had followed him could have been very different if they had listened to the loving pleas of Adonias and his son. Was it not the king's plan and Melchizedek's dream to see him as the protector of the parchment, second in honor in this kingdom? Shammah, acknowledging his defeat, had bowed his head before the throne and had witnessed all this grief. However, deceived by his pride, he judged it as a demonstration of weakness on the part of his enemies. When he remembered that his fortified army awaited him in the plain, he deceived himself with the certainty that he would emerge victorious from Salem. Under this thought, he lifted his hate-marked brow and, looking at the king, raised his fist to defy him, denying his authority and threatening to strip him of the throne. The subjects of Salem, though forgiven for their fall, could not bear the audacious affront of the deranged youth who, after causing so much suffering, was still capable of rising with such defiance. The victorious king, as pleased as he had sealed the faithful's conquest with his scepter, lifted it painfully to seal the rebels' sad fate. Immobile by a strange force, Samael, without turning his gaze from the scepter, heard from the king's mouth the proclamation of his judgment and that of all his followers. From this day forth you shall be prisoners of an invisible force that shall hold you in your caves for 6 years. After this time you shall be visited by the fire of judgment that shall destroy you and the cities that made alliance with you. Chapter 13. An angel appears to Melchizedek in his dreams. He guides him and shows him in the vision the celestial Salem. Now, Melchizedek is the guardian of God's deepest revelations. The story of Salem will have a similarity with the history of the universe. Melchizedek moves and honors the Messiah, discovering he has become an image of him. He begins a battle for the disputed scepter, and the day of final judgment arrives. After an emotionally charged day, the young king, immersed in memories of this past of happiness and pain, tossed and turned in his bed without sleeping. When he finally managed to fall asleep, he had a very significant dream. In the dream, a bright angel appeared to him. He greeted him with a smile and told him that the entire universe was closely following the drama he was living. However, this dream had a prophetic significance, as it described past and future events involving the entire vast universe. The angel's words awakened in Melchizedek a great desire to know the history behind this cosmic drama. Knowing his keen desire, the angel drew him from sleep, revealing before his eyes the glories of a new and splendid Salem. The walls and dwellings of the city were made of precious stones, the gates were of pearls, and its broad avenues were of pure gold. The city was square-shaped and stretched for hundreds of kilometers, divided into two distinct sectors, north and south. In the south there were countless dwellings, eternal homes for angels and redeemed humans. In the north there was a beautiful paradise that the angel revealed as the Garden of Eden. There, on each side of the river of life, there were fields filled with all kinds of vegetation, with flowers and fruits in abundance, where all species of insects, birds, and animals lived in perfect harmony. In the middle of the paradise stood a shining mountain that the angel described as Mount Zion, the place of God's throne. From this mountain flowed the river of life that ran through the entire city. Upon reaching the summit of the sacred mountain, the king of Salem was dazzled. Encrusted with magnificent pearls, the palace was surrounded by the most exuberant vegetation. There were pine trees, cypresses, olive trees, rosemary and fig trees bending under the weight of their ripe fruits. As he admired the beauty of this place, the angel told him that no human being had ever had the privilege of seeing the inside of this palace of God. However, this privilege would be granted to him because he had been chosen to be the bearer of the deepest revelations about the kingdom of light. When they reverently prostrated themselves before one of the pearl gates, they bowed in worship, hearing the song of a multitude of seraphim surrounding the heavenly throne, constantly praising the one who was, who is, and who will always be. As Melchizedek looked upon the one seated on the throne, he was surprised to see the figure of a man. He was clad in a cloak of fine linen of incomparable whiteness, and wore on his head a crown formed of 7 overlapping crowns, filled with precious stones. Those who held the scepter, Adonias' son, were surprised to discover scars of wounds similar to those on their own hands. The angel said he was the Messiah, the visible manifestation of Yahweh, the invisible God. Drawn by the shining scepter with which the Messiah ruled the entire universe, the king of Salem saw in it the seal of dominion, upon which was written a name, Israel. Struck with deep emotion, Melchizedek prostrated himself before the king of this eternal Salem. Reliving the history of his small people, he desired to know the great drama of universal history. Knowing the desire of his heart, the angel said to him, "Now I will tell you the story of this glorious Salem. Everything you see in the vision, you must faithfully record on 6 scrolls that will be sewn together to form one scroll. You will have 6 years to write it. At the end of the 7 years, you will receive from the hands of an elder a vessel containing a special scroll with many important revelations, highlighting the history of Salem. You will take this scroll and recognize it as the first of the 7, forming one scroll. After sealing it, you and the elder shall keep it in the vessel, placing it in a cave that I will show you north of the Dead Sea, where it will remain forgotten until the last days, when it shall be resurrected and revealed to the world through a young Bedouin." After speaking these words to the king of Salem, the angel guided him in vision to an infinite past, when the universe did not yet exist. A story very similar to that of Salem began to unfold before his eyes, but on an infinitely larger scale. Beginning with the creation of the kingdom of light, he admired the formation of billions of worlds and stars teeming with life and happiness, revolving around the celestial Salem, God's paradise. His attention then turned to the most beautiful of all the cherubim, who, honored by the Creator, began to reside with him in his palace. He was a master of happiness and peace, seemingly enchanting the realm. But suddenly the same experience of selfishness and rebellion experienced by Samael began to replicate itself in the life of this beloved angel. Then scenes of a great rebellion began to unfold before Melchizedek, involving all the inhabitants of the universe. This honest cherubim, similar to Samael, had seduced a third of the cohorts, who began to worship him as king. Amid scenes of this great conflict, the king of Salem witnessed the creation of planet Earth, upon which man emerged as the rational center of the contested kingdom. With anguish, he saw the moment when the leader of the rebellion subtly approached paradise, seizing humanity by seducing it with temptations. Suddenly, he heard his roar as a proclamation of victory. It was from this moment that the enemy of God began to corrupt humanity, extinguishing in it all the characteristics of divine glory, just as Samael had done with the scepter. His own experience of when he had declared that morning to the subjects of Salem his decision to seek the lost scepter began to replay before his eyes. Gathering the cohorts that had remained faithful to his rule, the Creator began to reveal a plan of rescue and redemption for man, though it required an infinite sacrifice. Before this revelation, Adonias' son, moved, prostrated himself, discovering that he had had the honor of representing the Messiah himself. The entire drama experienced by Adonias' son in his anguished quest until the moment of his trial for the redemption of the scepter was magnified in this vision that embraced an entire eternity. Before his eyes flashed scenes of a great battle that would continue unabated until the day of the final judgment, when the victorious Messiah would wield the redeemed scepter, sealing with it the condemnation of all rebel cohorts. Chapter 14. Melchizedek became aware of the great liberation through the revelations manifested to him by the angel of the Lord. Abraham, Isaac, Lot, and his 2 daughters, as well as the shepherds and the faithful, are joyfully welcomed in Salem to celebrate the feast of Sukkot. Abraham hands him the scroll, and Melchizedek sews it, adding it to his own. After reading a portion of Abraham's scroll, Melchizedek blesses the little Isaac and prophesies about the future of the scroll. Thanks to the revelations received from the angel, Melchizedek became aware of the great revelation that had occurred 10 days before his coronation on Rosh Hashanah. Before 300 shepherds with their lit urns, the armies of 5 kings had collapsed, thus freeing the captives. Recognizing our intention to ascend to Salem for Sukkot, the king made preparations for a great feast where we would commemorate together the victory over all discord generated by pride and selfishness. When we arrived in Salem, we were surprised by the honorable reception that awaited us. Narrating the story of all these events made me traverse this 7th year almost without noticing, the days passing quickly. Today we stand at the gates of a new Rosh Hashanah. The 300 shepherds have sounded the horns, calling all those who possess the pearls to the solemn gathering of Lion Kim for 5 days. Then we shall be welcomed in Salem for the feast of Sukkot. The certainty that important events must continue to be recounted until the moment the vase is placed in the cave urges me to reserve space in the scroll where I will record day by day the events until the fulfillment of this story. Today is Rosh Hashanah, the happiest day of my life, because my arms can finally embrace my son of promise. The first thing Sarah did upon receiving him was to place in his right hand the 2nd pearl that the Messiah had given her on the day of her conversion, upon which was written the name of Isaac, meaning laughter, the name of Melchizedek, and the name of Salem. 2 days before Sukkot, Isaac was circumcised according to the order of the key. Since the shepherds began blowing their horns at Rosh Hashanah, all those who possessed pearls from the vase have emerged from their tents. In small groups, they journeyed together toward the oak of Manre, where the day of the solemn gathering was announced. My shepherds informed me that all those who had received pearls were present at the meeting. Not a single person was missing. It was wonderful to see the joy on the faces of this crowd, who longed to ascend to Salem. All had a story to tell of how they had been misunderstood and humiliated by those who had not received the salvation represented by the pearls. The moments when their only comfort came from the certainty that they would ascend to Salem for the Feast of Sukkot. On the day of the Feast of Sukkot, the crowd divided into small groups of 12 people to line up in Salem, carrying the vase with the scroll on their backs. I positioned myself in front of the crowd, followed by Sarah and Isaac riding on a camel. Then Lot and his daughters, and a little further back, the 300 shepherds, followed by all the faithful. We began our ascent when, accompanied by all his subjects, Melchizedek came to meet us, filling the air with the festive sound of many musical instruments commemorating the great victory. After greeting us, Adonias' son led us in a festive march to the gates of Salem, which were now even more beautiful than before. Before the throne, all the redeemed were crowned by Melchizedek, immediately inaugurating the grand banquet. The joy of the king of Salem was great when I handed him the vase with my manuscript. Leading me into a special room in the palace, he showed me the 6 manuscripts in which he had recorded the history of the universe as it had been shown to him in his dream. Upon receiving my manuscript, he recognized them as the others, becoming the first of the grand scroll. On the last day of the Feast of Sukkot, the scroll was opened before the entire crowd of faithful. After reading a good portion of the manuscript, Adonias' son, taking little Isaac in his arms, said, "It is in the descendants of this child that all the things written in this manuscript must be fulfilled." After these words, the king blessed him and returned him to Sarah. After blessing Isaac, Melchizedek began to speak of the future of the scroll, which would remain hidden in a cave for nearly 4 millennia. It would eventually be discovered by a Bedouin from the tribe of Estamir as he emerged from his cave. The scroll would face opposition from many scholars who would declare it apocryphal. However, the time would come when its revelations would be confirmed, transforming many people by its messages, preparing for the day of judgment. The story of the universe, a story written by Melchizedek, revelations of an angel of the Lord who appeared to Melchizedek in a dream the night following his coronation. This occurs 1 year after recovering the scepter of Salem, having paid the price of his rescue with pain and blood. Chapter 1. The Eternal lived an eternity before creating the universe, the world of light, Mount Zion, the river of life, the Garden of Eden, and Jerusalem, the city of peace. Lucifer was created as the firstborn of the angels. The laws of divine government are governed by freedom of choice. The angels are the guardians of the kingdom of light. The separation between the universe and the abyss of darkness, as a test of fidelity, precedes the appearance of a bright star and singing angels. Before even a star shone, and before angels sang, there existed in heaven the abode of the Eternal, the only perfect God in wisdom, love, and glory. The Eternal lived an eternity before realizing his beautiful dream, the creation of the universe and the countless beings that make up creation, all idealized with love, from the tiny atom to the gigantic galaxies, all deserving of his supreme attention. Loving music, God created the universe as a grand orchestra that, under his direction, was to vibrate with harmonious chords of justice and peace. For each creature, he composed a love song. The Eternal was very content, for his dreams were about to come true. Moving with majesty, he began his work of creation. His hands first shaped a world of light, and above, a resplendent mountain where the throne of the universe would be established forever. To the sacred mountain, God named it Zion, the foundation of his throne. The Eternal caused a crystal-clear river to gush forth to represent the life that would flow from him to all creatures. As a throne room, he created a beautiful paradise that stretched for hundreds of kilometers around Mount Zion. He called this paradise Eden. To the south of paradise, on both banks of the river of life, many mansions adorned with precious stones were built, intended for the angels, ministers of the kingdom of light. Around Eden and the angelic abodes, God built a wall of shining jasper, along which were great gates of pearls. With joy, the Eternal beheld the capital of his dreams, the city in all its splendor, like a bride adorned and ready to receive her groom. Affectionately, the grand architect called it Jerusalem, the city of peace. God was now about to give birth to the first rational creature, a glorious angel, the most honorable of all, adorned with the brilliance of precious stones. This angel would live on Mount Zion, as the representative of the King of Kings before the universe. With much love, the Creator began to shape the firstborn of the angels, applying all his wisdom to make him perfect. He tenderly gave him life. This magnificent angel, as if waking from a deep sleep, opened his eyes and looked upon the face of his Maker with joy. The Eternal showed him the beauties of paradise, telling him of his plans that were beginning to materialize. When he was led to his dwelling place near the throne, the Prince of Angels showed gratitude and sang his first praise. From the heights of Zion, the beautiful Jerusalem unfolded before the angel's eyes, resplendent in its vastness and splendor. The river of life, gliding peacefully through the city, seemed like a long avenue reflecting the beauties of the Garden of Eden and the angelic abodes. Enveloping the firstborn of the angels in his cloak of light, the Eternal began to speak to him about the principles that would govern the universal kingdom. Physical and moral laws were to be respected throughout the expanse of divine government. Moral laws were summed up in two fundamental principles: to love God above all and to love others as oneself. Each rational creature was to be a channel through which the Eternal could pour forth another life and light. Thus the universe would grow in harmony, happiness, and peace. In the kingdom of God, laws would not be imposed by tyranny. The subjects would be free, and obedience would arise spontaneously as an act of recognition and gratitude. In this kingdom of freedom, disobedience would also be possible, and its result would be the depletion of vital forces. After revealing to the beautiful angel the laws of his government, the Eternal entrusted him with a mission of great responsibility: to be the protector of these laws, to honor and reveal the universe ready to be created. With a heart overflowing with love for God and others, he was to be a model of perfection. This would be Lucifer, the bearer of light, the Prince of Angels. Grateful for everything, Lucifer prostrated himself before the loving king, promising eternal fidelity. The Eternal then continued his work of creation, bringing forth countless hosts of angels, the ministers of the kingdom of light. The holy city was populated by these radiant creatures who, joyful and grateful, united their voices in magnificent songs of praise to the Creator. God now brought forth a universe that, filled with life, would revolve around his throne established in Zion. Accompanied by his ministers, he set out for this great achievement. After contemplating the vast void, the Eternal raised his mighty hands, commanding the materialization of the multiform wonders that would compose the cosmos. His order, like thunder, resounded everywhere, magically causing countless galaxies filled with worlds and suns to appear, a paradise of life and joy, harmoniously revolving around Mount Zion. In the presence of this grand bed of the Supreme King, the angelic hosts prostrated themselves, sending through the illuminated space a triumphant song in greeting to life. The entire universe joined in this song of gratitude in promise of eternal fidelity. Guided by the Eternal, the angels began to discover the riches of the universe. On this sidereal excursion, they marveled at the immensity of the kingdom of light. Everywhere, they found worlds inhabited by happy creatures who welcomed them in celebration. The angels greeted them with songs, telling of the good news of this kingdom of peace, so precious. Just as in life, the freedom to choose through which creatures could show their love for the Creator required a test of fidelity. In order to reveal the nature of this test, the Eternal led the hosts of angels through the illuminated space until they approached an abyss of darkness, contrasting with the immense brightness of the galaxies. From afar, this abyss had seemed insignificant to the eyes of the angels, like a spot without light. But as they approached, its enormity became apparent. The Creator, who at every step revealed to the angels the mysteries of his kingdom, waited there in silence, as if keeping a secret to himself. The darkness of this abyss constituted the test of fidelity. Turning to the cohorts, the Eternal solemnly declared, "All the riches of light will be open to your knowledge, except the secrets hidden by darkness. You are free to serve me or not. By loving the light, you will be bound to the source of life." With these words, God made the separation between light and darkness, between good and evil, and thus the universe would be free to choose its destiny. Chapter 2. Through an eternity of harmony and peace, Lucifer becomes the messenger of the Father's revelations to his angels, holding assemblies on obedience to divine laws as the foundation of progress and happiness. However, Lucifer is drawn to the darkness of the abyss, leading him into a great inner struggle. Through the gift of free will, the theory of the science of good and evil is born in the kingdom of the eternal. The betrayal of Lucifer leads to the distancing of a third of the heavenly troops, alerting the eternal to the rupture of the source of life, thus putting the universe to the test. The inconsolable weeping of the Father resonates, and the mysterious abyss becomes a symbol of the kingdom of rebellion. The beginning of the creation of planet Earth marks the realization of the long-awaited dream of the Creator. Now, as a loving Father, he guides his creatures through an eternity of harmony and peace through the observation of divine laws. The universe expands in happiness and glory, animated by fervent love. Rational beings endowed with the power of infinite development find indescribable pleasure in discovering the infinite treasures of divine wisdom and transmitting them to their peers. In Jerusalem, the ministers of the kingdom gather before the sovereign king, always ready to fulfill his designs. It is through Lucifer that the Eternal reveals his designs to all. However, the fall of Lucifer triggers a period of great struggle in the hearts of creatures, torn between light and darkness. Lucifer, initially drawn by curiosity towards the abyss, gradually turns towards the darkness, questioning why he cannot understand its enigma. Pleading with the Father to reveal to him the secrets of darkness, Lucifer is denied this request, as he was created for the light. However, Lucifer decides to uncover the mysteries of darkness on his own. Even before the creation of the universe, God had foreseen the possibility of rebellion, aware of the risks associated with the freedom granted to creatures. Lucifer, despite his temporary repentance, conceives a deceitful theory called the science of good and evil. This theory seduces many angels, challenging the divine order established by the Eternal. The council formed by the rebellious angels considers asking for the divine throne to demonstrate the excellence of their new system of government. Lucifer, with arrogance, makes this request to the Creator, but God refuses, knowing that it would lead to misery and death. The accusations of the rebellious angels resonate throughout the universe, casting doubt on the justice of the divine government. The climax of the confrontation occurs when the Eternal rises from his throne and withdraws from the Garden of Eden. The faithful angels respectfully accompany his steps of withdrawal, anticipating a future of suffering and humiliation. However, the rebels seize the divine throne, thus profaning the kingdom of sin. The faithful finally understand the meaning of the mysterious abyss, symbolizing the kingdom of rebellion. God, in an act of pure humility, commands light into the abyss, unveiling an unfinished world covered in crystalline waters. A great battle between light and darkness begins, symbolizing the struggle of good against evil, of love against selfishness, of life against death. The Creator's final victory is anticipated, where he will return triumphant to Mount Zion to reign eternally in perfect peace. Chapter 3. The work of creation continues with the separation of the waters, marking the beginning of vegetation. The Garden of Eden is relocated to the new planet. The great luminaries are created, as well as marine, flying, and terrestrial creatures. The creation of Adam, the first man, who prostrates himself in respectful worship before the Eternal, and the earth in a paradisiacal state. Adam admires a creature, names it Lamb, which will be like the Eternal and to whom the promise of a companion is made, appearing after Adam's deep sleep. Eve is created, and God grants her a royal cloak and a crown. They show their submission to the Eternal by placing their crowns at the feet of the Creator. Man becomes the faithful administrator, the rational center, and the arbitrator of creation. Heba realizes the presence of Satan, who presents her with the tree of life and the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Satan opts for deceit as a weapon to induce man to eat the forbidden fruit. When darkness is overcome on the third day of creation, the Creator continues his work by bringing forth the immense continents still under the surface of the waters. The crystalline waters, obeying the divine order, occupy a position superior to the emerged terrestrial surface, thus creating the lower regions of the earth. The waters reflect the heavenly splendor, serving as refreshment to thirsty creatures. In a gesture of humility, the waters prefigure the Creator who, in the great struggle, descended to the depths of the abyss to bring forth eternal life in thirsty souls. The Eternal calls the dry land earth, and the gathering of waters seas. His powerful voice commands the earth to produce green grass, fruit trees that yield fruit according to their kind, obeying the divine commandment. The solid surface of the planet is covered with all kinds of vegetation, with magnificent meadows, green fields crossed by crystalline rivers, and endless forests. The earth becomes like a canvas that the Creator colors with paintings of unparalleled beauty by the power of His word. The hosts, admiring the beauty of this creation, recognize the new world as the Garden of Eden, moved by the powerful word of the Eternal. One spring day, the Creator, contemplating His work, exclaims joyfully, "Behold, everything is good and exuberant." The planet completes one more day in its harmonious rotation. The faithful hosts better understand the importance of divine light, as its absence had obscured the beauties of Zion during the night. But on this new day, the Creator manifests His great power by endowing the earth with luminaries that bring light and warmth. These luminaries will forever remain as symbols of the spiritual presence of the Eternal, the source of all light. Contemplating the dark and void space around the earth, the Creator orders to have luminaries in the expanse of the heavens, so there may be a separation between day and night, and they may be signs to mark the seasons, days, and years. The luminaries in the expanse of the heavens immediately illuminate the space with the brilliance of the sun, planets, and satellites. Faced with this demonstration of power, the faithful hosts kneel in adoration. On the fourth day, the Eternal creates the worlds of our solar system, not intended to be inhabited like the earth, but for the balance of the system. The sky is filled with splendor, softening the darkness of terrestrial nights. The hosts rejoice at seeing the earth radiant with colors, with the moon nearby, chasing away the deep nocturnal shadows with its silvery reflection. The children of light, rejoicing, greet the dawn of the fifth day, full of surprises. The Eternal makes the earth festive by the presence of countless species of irrational animals that inhabit its entire surface. This creation continues on the sixth day when the Creator, raising His mighty hands, orders the production of abundant reptilian waters of living souls. Immediately the waters become undulating with the presence of countless species of reptiles who joyfully celebrate their existence by swimming and jumping continuously from microscopic to large whales. All appear in perfect harmony, reflecting in their nature the love of the Creator. With eyes turned towards the blue atmosphere resting on the green forests, the Eternal commands the birds to fly over the peace of the heavens' expanse. According to His command, the heavens are filled with colorful birds flying in all directions, carrying in their hearts a song of gratitude for life. This song fills every space of the air, mingling with the scent of blooming bushes. Blessing His earthly creatures, the Eternal declares, "Be fruitful and multiply, fill the waters of the seas, and let the birds multiply on the earth." The faithful hosts joyfully observed the dawn of the sixth day, wondering what God would create that day. The question reigned in the minds of all rational beings, convinced that something special was about to happen. Raising His mighty arms, the Eternal orders the creation of land animals according to their kind, livestock, reptiles, and wild beasts of the earth according to their kind. His powerful voice is quickly heard in the forests and fields, where the result of creative power manifests. Animals of all species begin a happy existence amidst a paradise of perfect peace. The earth becomes extremely beautiful, like a princess adorned to receive her king and lord. Moving with majesty, the Eternal descends into the glories of the new world, heading towards the Garden of Eden, the place of the divine throne. The angels of light respectfully accompany Him, hanging like clouds in the skies of paradise. The entire universe watches with deep interest the unfolding of the Creator's acts in response to the accusations of His enemies. The moment is decisive, Everything indicates that the Eternal will show that he is neither a tyrant nor selfish by crowning someone on Mount Zion. Satan and his supporters have no doubt that the king will not be delivered to them and that they will reign victorious within this ancient abyss where darkness and light now intermingle. The subjects of light shudder at this prospect, but near the source of the river of life, the Eternal knelt solemnly, and with the natural elements of the earth, began to lovingly shape a special creature. After a few moments, the still lifeless body of the first man lay before the Creator. The Eternal looked at him, and after caressing his cold and discolored face, breathed into his nostrils the breath of life. The man began to live, as if awakening from a dream. The man opened his eyes and beheld the gentle face of his Creator, who, smiling, embraced his now colorful and vibrant face. Moved to hear the Eternal say in a soft and loving voice, "You are my son, my beloved son, born on the earth." The first man was named Adam. Taking Adam's hand, the Eternal raised him, and without perceiving the scene of the brilliance surrounding him, Adam, in a gesture of gratitude for existence, embraced the Creator tenderly, prostrating himself in respectful adoration. The faithful hosts who had admired the great divine achievement, moved by this human gesture, also prostrated themselves in respectful adoration. Then, uniting their voices in a song of joy, as a greeting to this special creature who had been awakened to life at such a decisive moment for the universe, Adam, with a heart full of happiness, joined the angels in their song of praise. His voice, traversing the flourishing paradise, mingled with the song of birds and the passing of animals who approached joyfully in a procession of unforgettable surprises. Adam became aware of the beauties of his home, and with admiration he saw Mount Zion where the river of life flowed in a cascade of light. The glorious mountain was crowned by a beautiful rainbow, following the course of the crystalline river that serpentinely wound amidst the wonders of Eden. Adam admired the tall trees whose branches hung with abundant flowers and fruits, bowing here and there. Drawn by the brilliance of the gemstones that adorned the grass everywhere, Adam felt with intense joy the countless species of animals that populated the garden. All were gentle and submissive, living in perfect harmony and happiness. Pausing in his walk, Adam admired the whiteness and tenderness of an animal leaping on the grass. Approaching, he took it in his arms, granting it special affection. It was pleasant to stroke its white wool, and its gentle eyes reflected a glow of love and humility. This animal had something special. Adam affectionately named it Lamb. With the animal in his arms, Adam gratefully admired the Eternal and adored him as he contemplated his white garments and expressive eyes of unmatched love. Adam discovered that he held in his arms a symbol of his joy. He exclaimed joyfully, "O Lord, this little lamb clad in such white wool with eyes full of love resembles you. I want to have it always with me." Observing the animals, Adam perceived that they enjoyed a particular communion. He saw happy couples everywhere living for each other. Then his thoughts turned to his companion. He looked around and was surprised not to see her. The Eternal had deliberately made her invisible. Adam felt alone in the midst of this paradise. Although there were animals, they were irrational, unable to share his ideals. It was then that a fervent desire arose in his heart to find someone with whom to share his happiness and love. As Adam looked at the distant hills with the hope of seeing someone, the Eternal appeared at his side and said, "It is not good that man should be alone. I will make a companion for him." Adam rejoiced to hear this promise from the Creator, and just at the moment when he so desired to have someone by his side, he was seized by a deep sleep. Adam lay on the chest of his loving Creator, who with caresses lulled him to sleep. In his subconscious, the first colorful dreams arose. Contemplating with the tender gaze of the Eternal the wonders of his surroundings, Adam heard the harmonious sound of angelic music, discovering Mount Zion with its rainbow, the river of life, the flowered meadows, the animals saluting in festivity. These scenes surrounding him repeated in his dream, but when he looked around hoping to find his companion, he did not see her. He felt alone in his mind, which urged him to seek someone with whom to share his existence. His gaze then stretched across the verdant countryside, seeing in the distance flowered hills. Walking with hope, he felt the gentle breeze caressing his hair and said, "The breeze seems to be the one I seek so much. You stroke my hair, you kiss my face, you have the scent of green bushes. If only I could see your face, I would do anything to see it. If only I could touch your hair, I would braid long strands and adorn them with flowers from our garden." After walking in the dream through the meadows of paradise, Adam stopped, contemplating the surrounding landscape, and marveled at not seeing the effect of the breeze on the flowering branches. How was this possible? Hadn't he felt it warm on his face? Then he began to wake up from his dream. Still with closed eyes, he remembered the moment when, drowsy, he lay on the chest of the Eternal. Wondering if the breeze had touched his hands, he opened his eyes and was moved, for before him stood a beautiful woman who, with her fragrant hands, lovingly caressed his face. She was the breeze of his dream, the promise of the Creator, who only wanted to make him happy. Now Adam was complete because he had Eve, flesh of his flesh and bone of his bone. Taking her hand, Adam invited her to a walk full of unforgettable surprises, where he would show her the beauties of his new home. Eve's sensitivity stopped at every step, drawn by the flowers exhaling sweet scents, by the birds singing joyfully, by the animals following her docilely, by the vegetation with rich hues, and by the crystalline waters of the river of life cascading from Mount Zion. The entire paradise was perfect and beautiful to her, but nothing compared to the human being created in the image of God. They turned to each other with admiration and caresses, imbued with this love, and remained until sunset. With unmatched pleasure, the young couple contemplated the setting sun, which, through its pink rays, colored the sky in a magnificent tableau. And thus, the sixth day came to an end, giving way to the hours of a special day, the Sabbath, a day that in its significance would be solemn for all subjects of the Eternal, for its rising would bring victory to the kingdom of light. The sun, which had illuminated nature with its brightness and warmth on the sixth day, set, giving way to the cold darkness. The joyful birds, silencing their trills, sought their nests, while the other animals retired. Only the pair remained still, seeking to see in the last fading light on the horizon the hope of a new dawn. Troubled by the sensation of darkness, they saw among the bushes a beautiful light whose silver rays bathed nature in a gentle luminosity. Now that the entire sky was illuminated by the brilliance of the stars, they discovered that the night was merely darkness. However, in their innocence, Adam and Eve were unaware that this night symbolized the dark future awaiting humanity. Thus, when it became clear to them, contemplating the brilliance of the heavens would bring them comfort and hope, transforming the nocturnal firmament into the place where they would speak of the future, the sparkling stars bearing witness to the interest of the hosts of light in dispelling their moral darkness. However, in those times, only those who turned their eyes away from the earth to contemplate the heavens would be enlightened. After gazing at the sky for some time, the couple remembered the beauties of paradise and turned their eyes around to see them. However, these were hidden amidst the shadows, and they ardently desired the dawn. Already, bringing paradise before the human heart created a feeling of comfort. So feeling the effects of sleep, Adam and Eve lay down in the loving lap of the Father, who gently put them to sleep, hoping for a happy awakening. There, in the soft grass, the Eternal rose beside the contemplative hosts and would manifest himself again at dawn, awakening the couple for the most solemn event that would refute the vilest accusations of the enemies. The dark and cold night, through its long hours, seemed to mock the light, endlessly seeking the beauties of creation and never yielding to darkness. It would soon appear as a liberator, snatching nature from the cold claws with its warm rays, restoring life and color in the final challenge. Darkness thickened in the hours before dawn, and the night raged with all its might, fighting for usurped domination. However, this would not last long, for at last a glimmer appeared in the east, seeming to speak of the hope of a new day. Gradually the sky tinged with a bright red, and the imposing darkness retreated before the increasing strength of the light. Nature began to awaken from the long night, reflecting in its bosom the nostalgic rays. Now the flowers opened, exhaling scents of joy, and the animals and birds that had been silenced during the night joined their voices in a triumphant song heralding the rise of this great day. Everything that had happened so far had a special meaning for God, for the ascension of light foreshadowed the final victory of his kingdom over the dominion of rebellion. Now satisfied with his work, the Eternal would awaken his human sons, bathed in the light of his presence, who had slept in hope of a happy awakening. Likewise, in a festive procession, all the holy hosts accompanied him with songs of victory to the light-bathed paradise. When they were near, the Creator ceased to look at the sleeping couple and gently exclaimed, "Awaken, my children," his voice penetrating the ears of Adam and Eve and awakening them for the happiest communion. With joy, the couple greeted their divine Creator, joining the angels in triumphant antiphons. Now the universe would experience a truly solemn moment, for on this festive morning, the Eternal would finally reveal the greatness of his character, represented by justice and love. He would refute the accusations that his government was selfish and tyrannical. In the eyes of all rational creatures in the vast universe, God led the young couple to Mount Zion, the place of the divine throne. There, before the trembling silent hosts, the Creator, in a surprising gesture, covered the man with a royal mantle and placed on his head the crown that Lucifer had coveted. Moved by deep gratitude for the supreme honor bestowed upon them, Adam and Eve respectfully bowed and placed their precious crown at the feet of the Creator, a sign of submission. This was followed by a cry of victory that shook the entire creation, where the children of light, who had long suffered insults and humiliations in the face of the constant accusations of rebel hosts, praised the blessed God. Indeed, in his work of justice, he had finally denied the enemies. The revelation of his character of humility, selflessness, and love was finally made. Having established man as the Lord of all creation, the Eternal, with a solemn voice, began to show him the greatness of his mission. Man would be a faithful steward, caring for the paradise and maintaining the source of the river of life clean. Furthermore, in his duty, he would honor the laws of justice and love, the foundations of the kingdom of light. As a rational center, he would freely accept the government of the one who had created him. His mandates made the hosts feel, amazed by the revelation of divine selflessness, that they understood that the Lord of Light would no longer govern the universe alone, but only with human consent. After revealing to the couple the infinite honor and responsibility of their mission, the Creator explained to them the spiritual conflict that was working toward the conquest of universal domination. Lucifer, who had served the divine king in Zion for countless eons, had become corrupted by pride and selfishness. He had rallied and was followed by a third of the rational hosts, who were now seeking to overthrow the Eternal by dishonoring him with vile accusations. Having revealed the painful situation in which the universe found itself, the Eternal, in a solemn gesture, showed them two imposing trees laden with large fruits, rising from the two banks of the river that sprung from the throne. The one on the right was revealed by the Lord as the tree of life, the monument of the kingdom of light. The one on the other side was revealed as the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, a symbol of rebellion. By eating the fruit of the tree of life, man would manifest his submission to the Creator, who is the source of life and light. However, eating from the other tree would give the enemy dominion over Zion, where the inevitable result of this course would be eternal death, not only for man but for all creation, which would be reduced to chaos under the fury of rebellion. So, after contemplating the two great trees that expressed in their fruits an infinite responsibility, Adam prostrated himself before the Creator, saying, "You are worthy, Lord, to reign over the universe, for by your wisdom, love, and power, all things have been created and continue to exist." With this, the Sabbath, now emblematic of divine triumph, swelled with praises. Now, all the sons of light joined the man in the most harmonious song of exaltation, directed towards the one whose greatness has no equal. It was with great horror that Satan and his disciples witnessed the great realization of the Eternal, where they bitterly witnessed the joy of the faithful with the coronation of man. This event overturned the strong accusations they had brought against the divine government. Filled with anger and frustration, they now considered the state of their sad condition. What a terrible and humiliating idea to see their plans of rebellion dissolve before the Creator. Plans that dissipated like shadows of the night, leading them to think that if they could, they would fill the Sabbath with darkness and thus erase all hope of victory from the minds of the subjects of the Eternal. Eventually, in their considerations, Satan and his leaders understood that they still had a chance to defy the Eternal. It was right in the middle of the Garden of Eden, on the heights of Zion. It was the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. A simple human gesture would suffice to have in their possession the coveted domain. But how to seduce these men? Fueled by the prospect of conquest, Satan ingeniously sought to formulate an approach plan. If his attempt failed, all chances of triumph would be dissolved, and with them all their dreams of adventure would collapse. But he came to the conclusion that deception would be his powerful weapon, for it was not by it that he had succeeded in dominating a third of the heavenly armies. All he had to do was wait, for at an opportune moment he would lay his ambush. Chapter 4. Eden is a kingdom of eternal joy, visited and instructed daily by the Eternal. Work becomes a source of development for faculties through the visits of celestial beings. Adam and Eve acquire knowledge about Lucifer's rebellion. God reveals to his troops Satan's evil intentions and sends 2 angels to warn man. Satan seizes a serpent to deceive Eve, and his arguments succeed. There is intense internal struggle between Adam and the fallen condition of his wife. Thus Adam decides to eat the fruit and remains by his wife's side, paying the high price of his rebellion. There is a wonderful revelation of the rescue plan. Now, the nature of creations, like that of Adam and Eve, changes, but in his infinite goodness, the Father promises them lasting garments. In Eden, there reigned the gentle tranquility of perfect peace. Everywhere benevolent birds made their joyful songs, heard in constant praise to the Creator. All nature in bloom seemed to proclaim a kingdom of eternal joy. The animals, united, jumped everywhere, always submissive to man, lord of this magnificent paradise. Happiness for the reigning couple became more and more intense with the rotation of these spring days. The tree, with its beauty, colored the sky, warning of the dark nights and announcing the hour of the Eternal's daily visit. Together, in the light of his presence, they spent a long time in joyful conversation. With courage, the couple told the Lord the amazing wonders they discovered each day in nature, and thus, filled with love, they discovered the meaning of each being. How grateful they were for the beautiful lessons learned at his feet with each passing day. Their love, respect, and admiration grew for the great Creator. For he had been good in bringing them into existence and granting them a home so filled with delights. And when they awoke with the joys of each day, came to their minds the caresses and sweet singing of the Eternal that lulled them to sleep every night. Adam and Eve's life in Eden was not idle, for the Creator had recommended them to take care of the garden. Their occupation was not burdensome, quite the contrary. It was pleasant and invigorating, for the Creator had indicated work as a source of benefits for man. Thus, occupying the mind and strengthening the body by developing all faculties was a great source of pleasure for man. On the other hand, it was quite common for the young couple to receive visits from celestial beings. The visitors always had news to tell and questions to ask. They spent a lot of time listening to talk about the wonders of the kingdom of light, and it was through these visitors that Adam and Eve began to have a deep understanding of Lucifer's rebellion and its eternal consequences. Adam and Eve also asked the visitors to teach them the harmonious celestial songs, for they admired how they delighted in joining their voices with the angelic choir. On the other hand, in his omnipotence, God was already aware of the enemy's terrible intention. Thus, summoning his main troops, the Eternal revealed to them with sadness the imminent danger looming over the universe. Satan was going to lay an ambush by tempting man to eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Faced with this revelation, the sons of light were fearful, for they knew Satan's formidable ease in ensnaring innocent creatures and binding them in his nets of death. Therefore, through a solemn council, they decided urgently to send messengers to warn man of the great danger. Thus, 2 powerful angels were tasked with this decisive mission. Immediately, The commissioned messengers passed through the gates of Jerusalem, arriving within the infinite expanse. Barely moments later, they traversed the intensities of the universe, crossing galaxies in their path. They entered the tunnel of the Orion constellation, and nearing the new system, they could now see at close distance the blue planet, where the fate of the universe would be determined. Meanwhile, in Eden, relaxation reigned. The young couple continued their innocent activities, enjoying the pleasure of a happy life. They were far from thinking that at this moment all the sons of light were tense, reflecting on their threatened future. Suddenly they saw in the clear sky the sign of the approach of celestial visitors. They raised their arms in joyful greeting. However, Adam and Eve surprised each other by not seeing the same joy on the faces of their visitors. The angels had an anxious expression on their faces, which they could not understand. They tried to change their sad expression by telling them the new discoveries made in paradise, but the messengers, not having time as on other occasions, interrupted them with words of warning. Satan would ambush them to make them eat from the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. If they listened and succumbed to temptation, they would drag the entire creation with them into the abyss of eternal chaos. The angels reminded them that the kingdom had been entrusted to them as a sacred deposit, demanding a life of fidelity to honor the one who, out of love, had allowed himself to be stripped and had placed himself in the position of host of the human being. Adam and Eve had to stand firm against the insinuations of the enemy, for only thus would they give eternal victory to the kingdom of light. If they succeeded, there would be a happy reward that would follow them in their triumph. So the angels revealed to them that God's plan was to transfer the heavenly Jerusalem to earth and couple it there with the new paradise, to remain there forever, where man submitted to the Creator would reign for the ages of ages on the mountain of Zion amid the praises of the universal troops. But all this depended entirely on the human position in the face of the temptations of the enemy, who would do everything to wrest the kingdom from them. Adam and Eve were afraid to know Satan's plans, but they were comforted in knowing that he could not harm them by forcing them to eat the forbidden fruit. If he tried to intimidate them with his power, all the troops of the Eternal would come to their aid. The messengers of light concluded their mission by recommending to the couple to remain vigilant, always keeping in mind the responsibility that weighed on them. They should not separate from each other, not even for a moment, for only together could they resist being seduced. Grateful for the warnings of the angels, they joined their voices in a song of promise, celebrating a great eternal victory. They were certain never to forsake the beloved Creator, even upon hearing the voice of the tempter. Encouraged by the human promise, the two messengers returned to the bosom of the heavenly Jerusalem, where, with the holy cohorts, they eagerly awaited the long-awaited triumph. Satan saw the messengers approaching paradise and heard the men's song promising eternal victory. This song aroused his envy and hatred to the point where he could no longer contain them. He told his followers that he would soon silence that irritating voice, for he would do everything in his power to turn human praises into blasphemies against the Creator. The rebel hosts were curious to know their leader's plans, but he warned them that they had to wait until everything was decided once and for all. If man listened to his voice by eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, he would be victorious and would forever possess dominion over the universe. But if man resisted by remaining faithful to the Creator, there would be no hope for them. Despite the appearance of eternal security around paradise, an expression of fear could now be seen on the faces of men since the departure of the angels. Adam and Eve remained silent, respectfully meditating on the enormous responsibility of their mission. They thought of the gravity of the imminent trial that would seal their fate and that of the entire creation. However, encouraged by the prospect of victory, they again joined their voices in a song expressing the joy of the long-awaited triumph. This melody banished from their minds any fear of defeat, and they ran joyfully through the green meadows accompanied by the animals, seeming to commemorate the great conquest. Feeling safe in their paradise, totally forgetting the danger of a possible ambush, Satan, who was closely observing the couple, sensed that his opportunity was approaching. He invisibly drew near to paradise and waited for the perfect moment to lay his ambush. Unaware of the enemy's presence, the couple continued in their carefree joy, playing with the animals. In Satan's deranged face, a malicious smile appeared as he observed the couple's negligence. In their exaltation, they had disregarded the messenger's final recommendation not to separate from each other. The cunning enemy, wasting no time, took possession of a serpent, the most beautiful in paradise, and gracefully brought it near Eve, who was sitting in the grass playing with the animals. She perceived the presence of the alluring serpent, whose body reflected the colors of the rainbow. Admiring to see it picking flowers and fruits from the garden, she gratefully took it into her arms to show affection. Having won the woman's affection, Satan, in his craftiness, led her near the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. Without her realizing the danger, he accompanied the serpent to the tree of the trial, now hiding the enemy in his arms, caressing it and speaking words of love, with the gleam of seduction in his eyes. The serpent began to speak, its words filled with wisdom and tenderness, and its voice was like that of an angel. She could hardly believe what she saw in its eyes. Her joy became immense at having such a fantastic creature in her arms. Then they began to talk about many things: love, the beauties of the garden, the power of the Creator. Eve, amazed by the serpent's vast knowledge, which spoke with mastery on any subject, full of curiosity, asked where the source of its great knowledge was. Confused, she asked the serpent, "Where is the source of your great knowledge? Tell me, for I also want to possess it." Then, without wasting time, Satan, pointing to the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, replied, "And there is the source of all my knowledge." Then he told her a lying story, claiming that he was a serpent like the others, eating the fruits of paradise. One day, by tasting this forbidden fruit, he had received, as if by enchantment, all virtues. Looking towards the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, Eve was astonished and confused. Could God, in his love, deprive his creatures of such goodness? Seeing her surprise, Satan asked disdainfully, "Did God not say that you may eat from all the trees of the garden?" Anxiously she replied, "Of the fruit of the trees of the garden we may eat, but of the fruit of the tree which is in the midst of the garden, God hath said, Ye shall not eat of it, neither shall ye touch it, lest ye die." The serpent disdainfully said, "That's not true, otherwise you would be dead. Indeed, the Lord has forbidden you to eat from this tree to prevent you from becoming like him." Knowing all things, the seductive words of the serpent caused confusion in Eve's mind, which held the memory of the Creator's command and his sentence. But at the same time, she had before her tangible evidence that contradicted these memories. Dazed, she began to doubt the character of the Eternal. Thus, in a challenge, the serpent took the fruits of the forbidden tree and began to savor them, placing a fruit in the woman's hands and telling her to eat. "No," said the Eternal, "if anyone touches this fruit, they shall die." A total silence reigned in the universe. On every inhabited planet, the sons of light watched helplessly this distressing scene. Their future was at stake. In Jerusalem there was great agitation. Mighty angels appeared before the Creator, asking permission to unmask the cowardly enemy hidden in this serpent. However, the Eternal forbade them to do so. If the use of force was the solution, he would have already applied it. They had to respect the free will granted to man. The sons of light suffered greatly, seeing the woman doubt him who had generously given them life and the opportunity to reign in this paradise. Adam, with the firm hope of securing the cherished victory, rushed in his haste. He saw his beloved sitting near the tree doing something dangerous. An awful feeling engulfed him, once again remembering the warnings received, but he tried to push that aside, thinking he would reach his wife before anything happened to her. Eve wavered in her conviction as she contemplated the fruit in her hands. For a moment, the future seemed dark and terrifying to her, but she overcame this feeling, thinking of the glories she would conquer by eating this fruit. Still undecided, she slowly raised her hands to touch the fruit with her lips. The subjects of the kingdom of light trembled, leaning with great terror. It seemed almost impossible at that moment for the woman to turn back. As the faithful wondered if there was any possible hope, they saw, with horror, Eve's terrible decision. She had chosen to forever break with the Creator, to become captive to death. The Eternal silently contemplated with pain this scene of rebellion, lowering his head with tears streaming down his face. He could not bear the pain of this separation. The faithful, in panic, believing themselves defeated, were aware that all was not lost if Adam resisted temptation by remaining faithful to the eternal. This would seal the great victory. Eve, deceived, could recognize her mistake and benefit from divine forgiveness. When Adam, in his anxious rush, reached the place of trial, it was too late. Seated near the stream, Eve savored the forbidden fruit carelessly. Adam was seized by anguish upon recognizing the sad condemnation. Filled with sadness, he looked at his wife, but found no words to awaken her from the bitter reality. Completely desperate, he raised his voice in a painful exclamation. "Eve, Eve, what are you doing eating the forbidden fruit?" The woman was overwhelmed by emotions that made her imagine she had reached a higher sphere of life. Upon hearing her husband's voice, still under the influence of illusory emotions, she looked up with a smile but was surprised to see him crying with deep bitterness. Adam sought to know the reason that had driven her to rebel against the eternal. Eve quickly began to tell him the fantastic story of the wise serpent, Satan. Satan knew that this story of the serpent would never convince the man to eat from the fruit of the forbidden tree. He had to find a subtle way to lead him to seal his own death, following in his wife's footsteps. Holding Eve in his power, he decided to make her an object of temptation, waiting for the opportune moment to bind her. "The day you eat of it, you shall surely die." The reminder of this phrase tormented Adam, anxious to see his beloved die in his arms. However, his distress diminished upon seeing that she remained happy and affectionate by his side, as if no harm had come to her. Relieved, Adam smiled again, responding to his companion's affections, indulging in the sweetest emotions. Unaware that it was the enemy enveloping her in his enchanting arms, Adam became lost in this enchanting moment. Eve then began to talk about her experience with the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. She spoke of the treasures of wisdom that had been revealed to her in her new kingdom. She would live very happily, but this felicity would be incomplete without her husband's participation. She spoke of the impossibility of turning back and insisted that he follow her. After recounting her decision to him, Eve, with a gentle smile, reached out her hands with a fruit, asking him to eat it as a demonstration of his love for her. With the tempting voice in his ears, Adam sat in the grass, lost in thought. His face grew pale again and his hands trembled. He was afraid to rebel against the Creator, but at the same time he understood that he could not live apart from his beloved wife, whom he loved infinitely. Eve was flesh of his flesh, an extension of his being. He felt anxious about having to make such a grave decision. The paleness of Adam's face was reflected on the faces of all the faithful to the eternal. They heard the enemy's insinuation and perceived with horror the man's hesitation. Adam's indecision left them desperate. If he obeyed Satan's proposal, all happiness would be forever banished. In the decisions of the human being lay the destiny of the entire universe. After an intense inner struggle, Adam looked at his companion. She had joined in the promises of eternal devotion. He would not leave her alone, would share with her the consequences of rebellion. He took a fruit from Eve's hands and, in a hurried gesture, brought it to his mouth, trying to stifle the voice of his conscience, speaking of eternal destruction. Adam threw himself into his wife's arms, savoring the high price of their rebellion. Satan, with cries of triumph, left paradise, swiftly flying with his countless cohorts who anxiously awaited the result of this risky attempt. Learning of human misery, they rejoiced loudly. They felt assured that the realm rightfully belonged to them, and they could establish an eternal reign there without ever being disturbed by the laws of the eternal. Throughout the universe, the sons of light suffered and mourned the defeat. Never had there been so much sadness and horror for the future. The voices that lived to sing praises to the Creator now preferred lamentations. The Eternal, overcome by infinite sorrow, had prostrated himself in tears before man's fall. However, he was not surprised, for even before creating the universe, he had already foreseen this triumph of rebellion. In his wisdom and love, he had idealized a rescue plan that would involve immense sacrifice. Drying the tears of his grief, he prepared to act mightily on behalf of his afflicted faithful, preventing them from falling into the hands of the enemy. In this mysterious intervention that seemed to oppose justice, the Eternal commanded his mightiest angels to immediately bypass the Garden of Eden, preventing Satan from seizing Mount Zion. comforted by the divine manifestation, the powerful creatures, in swift obedience, broke through the infinite space, instantly surrounding the paradise where man, already troubled by sin, lived in the darkness of a night that would be long and cruel. The sovereignty of the Eternal based on justice, how could he justify his actions before the enemies? He had not handed the kingdom to man of his own will, and man had not delivered it to Satan by free choice. As rational creatures were surprised by God's decisive actions, they heard his powerful voice resonating throughout creation, bringing revelation of the great mystery. This revelation was so wonderful that it would occupy the minds of the faithful for all eternity, becoming the subject of their sweetest meditations. God first spoke of the terrible condemnation weighing on man and all creation. He said that by detaching himself from the source of life, man had plunged into an abyss so deep that it could not be reached by his arm of justice and power. Humiliated and tortured by the enemy's claws, there was no longer any man beyond death, a painful brute of his spontaneous rebellion. Considering the human situation, the cohorts of light saw no possibility of triumph, for they knew that only man could interrupt the enemy's reign by bringing him back to the Creator. However, man, eternally enslaved by his nature, would be incapable of such victory. With a melodious and tender voice, God revealed the plan of redemption, saying, "Truly, man will reap the fruit of his rebellion in a terrible death. I cannot, with my power, change his destiny. If I were to do so, it would be unjust to my decree, but I will place all condemnation upon a substitute who will arise from the human lineage. Thus, man will not bear in his hands the rings of death. Being innocent and untainted in his nature, as the representative of humankind, he will face Satan and overcome him. After triumphing in this battle, he will demonstrate that love is stronger than selfishness, that truth is stronger than falsehood, and that humility is more powerful than pride. This faithful substitute will raise his victorious hands not to salute the great conquerors, but to take the cup of his own condemnation from the hands of enslaved humanity and drink obediently the cup of eternal death. It will be this immense sacrifice that will open to humans the opportunity to be redeemed, to return into the arms of the Creator with lost sovereignty." The cohorts, surprised by the revelation of the Eternal, questioned the identity of this substitute. The Creator, with an affectionate smile, told them, "I will be that man. My spirit will rest upon a virgin, and in her will be begotten a holy son. This young man will be divine and human. In his humanity, he will be subject to the divinity that will dwell within him. The redeemed will see him as the Father of eternity, the Creator and Redeemer, the King of kings. His name shall be Joshua, which means the eternal Savior. By assuming human nature, God would pay the high price of ransom by dying in place of sinners." The cohorts of light fell silent upon knowing the Creator's plan. The idea of seeing him submit to such a painful sacrifice to redeem lost sovereignty was too difficult to bear. However, there was no other hope of victory but through this offering of love. After tasting the high price of sin, the young couple felt unwell at first. They felt a great emptiness in their hearts, which was then filled with remorse and sadness. They realized that, inspired by greed, they had sealed their own sad fate and that of all creation. They thought that wearing aprons made of sewn sheets would free them from the feeling of shame towards the Creator. The Lord, approaching the place where the couple was hiding, asked Adam, "Adam, where are you?" His voice, echoing in the darkness, only brought back an empty echo, speaking of ingratitude and rebellion. God earnestly desired to embrace the couple in a warm embrace and confess his love to them, but seeing his children drift away from his presence, he felt overwhelmed by great sorrow. Faced with his tearful gaze, the future of humankind stretched into dark valleys of the realm of death. How many would be deceived by Satan, departing from his presence during the long night of sin, judging him as a tyrant lord seeking faults and weaknesses in sinners to punish them? However, the Creator would not cease to search for them in the dark valleys of the realm of death until he conquered a repentant people. Adam and Eve, exhausted from their hasty flight, hid among the foliage at the foot of a fig tree. Recognizing their nakedness, they tried to make aprons by sewing sheets together, thinking this would free them from the feeling of shame towards the Creator. The Lord, approaching the place where the couple was hiding, asked Adam, "Adam, where are you?" Unable to hide any longer from God, Adam stood up beside his companion and, with bowed head, presented himself before the Creator, prostrating himself at his feet. They could no longer face him because of the guilt they felt. Affectionately, the Creator took their hands, lifting them from the ground with a sorrowful expression on his face, and asked them why they had fled. "Have you eaten from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil?" he asked. Trembling, Adam, his voice broken by sobs of fear, replied, "The woman you gave me as my companion gave me the fruit and I ate." With this answer, Adam tried to excuse himself by blaming his wife. Turning to Eve, the Lord asked her, "Why did you do this, Eve?" She promptly replied, "The serpent deceived me and I ate." Thus, both refused to acknowledge their guilt, blaming each other. They simply attributed the responsibility to the Creator for all that was wrong because he had granted them free will, had created the woman, had created the serpent. In silence, God observed his children timid and bewildered, coming before him with a confused sadness. He foresaw that this would be the experience of countless human beings throughout history. How many would be lost by not recognizing their own guilt? How many would seek to justify themselves by blaming others, even the Creator himself? With gentle words, the Eternal attempted to lead them to acknowledge their guilt. He explained that only this acknowledgement could help them. Looking at the fragile garments woven by sinful hands, he said to the couple, "Children, these garments are insufficient. They dry up and fall apart quickly. You need durable clothing that covers your nakedness and frees you from condemnation. If you wish, I can give you these garments." Touched by the Creator's hopeful words, the couple bowed repentantly, discarding their illusory garments, symbols of their failure. They now desired the garments of salvation promised by the Divine Father. Chapter 5. God reveals the effects of man's fall and the plan of redemption. This plan involves the painful sacrifice of the symbol of the Savior, the Lamb. The garments promised to Adam and Eve are provided to them. The Creator manifests as the man who will save them, intensifying the couple's love and gratitude towards the Savior. The cohorts of evil worry about the intervention of the Eternal and the revelation of the rescue plan. The Eternal leads the couple out of the garden where Satan would try again to seize humanity. However, he fails before God, suppressing his threats. The consequences of the knowledge of good and evil manifest, and the Eternal becomes the companion of man in his journey on earth. The Creator's nature toward warfare is revealed, and an edifying work is created to counter the numerous assaults of Satan. These assaults show revelations of two worlds reflected in the fallen nature. An immaculate lamb is guided and prepared by God for sacrifice, symbolizing the conflict between good and evil. Its burning flame becomes the symbol of divine forgiveness, where even in its fallen state, nature reveals the plan of redemption. After contemplating their repentant children prostrated at his feet, the Eternal affectionately took them by the hand and lifted them up, rejoicing to reveal to humankind his plan of redemption. With tenderness, God began to show them the bitter results of their fall, saying, "Children, you have sealed the fate of all creation in the clutches of death. Harmony is already penetrating nature, seeking to destroy in it all virtues. The abyss into which you plunged through disobedience is deep, out of reach of my mighty arm. Detached from the source of life, there is no other human beyond death." After these words revealing a dark destiny, the Eternal invited the couple to follow him, penitent. Adam and Eve, in tears, followed the Creator in his steps of justice, which guided them instead of their shameful fall, where they thought they would find their painful end. On this distressing path, they wept, reminiscing about their past glory, destroyed by ingratitude. As their souls suffered, the frightening expectation of being reduced with creation to cold ashes under the darkness of this night of sin enveloped them. As they walked, they gazed through their tears at the sleeping beauty bathed in divine light, giving to innocent animals who were unaware of the great pain. Suddenly, the pair stopped, overwhelmed by intense sorrow. Their hesitant steps had led them to a lamb, the dearest animal. Would the eyes full of gentleness also dim, drying their tears? The Eternal commanded them to take the innocent lamb into their arms, cradling it against their chests. Silently, they followed the Creator's steps to the top of Mount Zion, the place of the shameful fall. There they contemplated the remnants of the fruit, and forcefully the memory of divine judgment came to their minds. The day you eat of it, you shall surely die. The dreadful moment had arrived. The guilty one must drink the bitter cup of death, succumbing without remedy. Aware of their fall, the couple realized, horrified, that the hands that had brought them to life now held a sharp stone knife. Trembling, they prostrated themselves and awaited the fulfillment of the just sentence, awaiting the blow that would reduce them to dust. They felt the gentle touch of divine hands that raised them to new life. The condemnation, however, would fall upon a substitute. Placing the knife in Adam's hands, the Creator said, "The lamb will die in your place, Adam. You must sacrifice it." Frightened by God's order, the couple wept and exclaimed, "Lord, the lamb is not innocent." With an expression of justice, the Eternal added, "If it does not die, you will not be able to obtain the garments I have spoken to you about." Faced with the Creator's insistence, trembling all over in a painful effort, Adam plunged the sharp stone into the lamb's chest. The blow was fatal, and the animal, shedding its precious blood, sank into the darkness of an endless night. Contemplating the lifeless lamb on the bloodied grass, the couple raised their voices and wept. They were beginning to grasp the enormity of their tragedy. Death was terrible. It had extinguished all the light from the innocent animal's eyes. Quietly leaning on the lamb's inert body, the Eternal removed the woolen coat and made tunics to cover the couple's nakedness. After clothing them, he affectionately asked them, "Have you understood the meaning of all this?" In deep reflection and amidst tears of gratitude, the couple exclaimed, "Our place to obtain garments, Adam and Eve." Though they understood this physical reality, they were far from comprehending the significance of this event. The Creator would reveal to them the mystery of divine love. With an expression of infinite mercy, God began to reveal to humankind the meaning of this painful sacrifice, saying, "The innocent lamb who suffered today symbolizes a man who will be born. In his eyes, there will be the same tenderness, the same love. He will be clothed in a righteous life like the white wool that covered the lamb. This man will grow as a renewal on the earth, without holding in his hands the bonds of sin, but his appearance will not bear the pomp of a king. He will be despised by many, will be a man of sorrow, for the weight of all provocations will rest upon him. In his faithfulness to the kingdom of light, he will battle the usurping enemy, ultimately defeating him. And after triumphing in his battles, he will take upon himself the burden of your condemnation, which will cause him a terrible death. He will be pierced by your rebellion, crushed by your iniquities, oppressed and humiliated. But he will not open his mouth, like the lamb that peacefully surrendered to death. He will grant you the merits of his victory, and wrapped in his garments of righteousness, he will be free from condemnations. You will thus obtain eternal life through the sacrifice of this righteous one who will be born, Adam and Eve. Between gratitude and pain, the couple listened to the revelation of this great redemption and respectfully asked who would be this special man in their offspring who would arise to accomplish such an immense sacrifice. The Creator, looking at them with tenderness and animated by a love that surpassed even death, embraced them affectionately and revealed, "I will be that man." Surprised by the Eternal's declaration, Adam and Eve remained motionless, contemplating his gentle face, understanding the significance of this immense sacrifice. They prostrated themselves at his feet, and their eyes, bathed in tears, exclaimed, "We deserve death, Lord, but you are innocent. You should not suffer in our place." Wiping away their tears, the Eternal spoke to them tenderly. "My children, I love you with an eternal love. That is why I will die in your place." Before this confirmation, the couple raised their voices in a painful lament, saying, "We have killed the Creator, we have killed the Creator." But God began to console the couple with words of hope, saying, After drinking the cup of eternal death, regain life, ascend to heaven, intercede there for the lost man, granting to all those who, repentant, accept my sacrifice, the garments of my victory. Together, we will finally triumph over the kingdom of sin, which will fall to ashes under our feet. Then, I will create a new heaven and a new earth, where only justice and love will reign, where we will live forever in perfect harmony and peace. The Creator, accompanied by the couple, remaining on Mount Zion, concluded his revelations by saying, "The Garden of Eden will now be empty. Humanity will pay during the long night of sin in its exile. However, you will not walk alone, for the Eternal will also be a pilgrim. Today, he will make all the difficult journey with man until we can together ascend the lost mountain, triumphing over the kingdom of death. The tree of the knowledge of good and evil, monument of rebellion, will then be undone, making way for a glorious tree that, joining its top to the tree of life, will become the commemorative ark of the great victory. The redeemed holy mountain will then rest forever as the universal throne that the faithful victors will call the throne of God and of the Lamb." Adam and his companion, after hearing such comforting and hopeful words, raised their voices in a song of gratitude and praise. They now knew the infinite love of their Creator and were more than ever ready to serve him. After comforting the couple, God led them out of Eden. It was not easy for them to bid farewell to this beautiful abode where they had not only been awakened to life in the arms of the Eternal, but had also experienced moments of pure happiness in the company of the Creator, angels and docile animals. As the pair seemed nostalgic in their farewell steps, Satan and his subjects watched with horror the intervention of the Eternal, shaken by the astonishing revelation of the rescue plan and filled with raging frustration. Understanding that if they indeed fulfilled the promise there would be no hope for them, great anger seized their hearts. Satan, refusing to acknowledge humanity's redemption, would do everything in his power to hold it back in the realm entrusted to him. When the couple, accompanied by the Creator, reached the valley ravaged by death, where Satan awaited them with fury to try to reclaim humanity, the pair trembled before the enemy. However, God's protective hands calmed them, expressing in his face the assurance of eternal justice. The Eternal repelled the threats of the enemy with the following words, "Human beings belong to me, for I have bought them with my blood." And as they walked in silence alongside the Creator, they sadly contemplated the signs of death imprinted in this nature once full of life. The beautiful flowers that had bloomed to exhale eternal fragrances now hung withered. The small birds that greeted them joyfully every morning with their songs now flew far away, emitting such sad tunes. Everything had changed in nature. The knowledge of good and evil had brought no good to the universe, but an intense spiritual and physical conflict. Faced with the devastating consequences of their fall, the couple, overcome by indescribable sadness, prostrated themselves and wept bitterly. God, also saddened by the pain and contemplating the dark picture, sought to console them with words of hope, speaking again of the new heaven and new earth he would one day create, where peace and love would reign in every heart. He assured them that there would be their eternal home, where they would always live together without bearing on their foreheads the marks of sadness, but crowns of eternal victory. He told them that tears would flow from their faces, but would no longer wet their eyes. Thus protecting Adam and Eve in their steps, the Creator led them through the wounded valley until they arrived at the foot of a hill which they climbed slowly, exchanging words of encouragement and hope. When their feet finally reached the soft grass covering the top of this hill, it was there that the couple saw every day the sun decline in the sky, bathing the firmament and valleys in a bright red, like the blood that had flowed from the Lamb's heart. Turning to the east, the pair, with a mixture of pain and nostalgia, gazed into the distance at the landscape surrounding them in this happy past. Seeing Mount Zion rise majestically in the midst of Eden, they wept as they remembered their fall, how weak they had been. The sun declined in their day, announcing the arrival of a sad night, the first outside of paradise. In a gesture of calmness, the Eternal, showing them the remarkable valley of the mountain, spoke to them tenderly. "This is where your temporary dwelling will be, from where you will be able to contemplate the paradise that will remain on the earth for some time, until it is gathered to its original place, within the heavenly Jerusalem. There, protected by justice, we will await the dawn of victory, and when that great day comes, we will return together where we will be crowned with glory in a kingdom of eternal happiness and peace. After speaking these words, God ordered the couple to build an altar of stones where every week, on the eve of Saturday, they should sacrifice a lamb in memory of his sacrifice, as a sign of his presence and to ensure that their sins would be forgiven. He would light a fire on the altar that would burn all night, consuming completely the offering of sacrifice, so that humanity could affirm its faith in the revealed truths, and not in the visible manifestation of the person of the Creator. From that moment on, he would remain invisible, and only on special occasions where his presence or that of angels would be necessary for revelations and warnings would this change. Then, as he looked upon his saddened children at that moment, for they seemed to be left alone, the Eternal spoke to them with love. Even if you must remain in this hostile environment, you have nothing to fear, for I will remain by your side. I will be a companion on the journey, and I will carry on my shoulders your burdens, your desires, and your struggles. When you are tempted by the enemy and on the verge of giving in, you can find refuge in my arms, always open to save you. And if one day you do not resist and are drawn by the fury of the enemy into the depths of the abyss, do not despair, for I will be there to meet you with my forgiveness and strength. Always keep in mind the significance of the garments received from my hands, for they speak of the redemption to which man belongs. Rest, my children, in my arms of love. After comforting the couple with these promises, the Creator, seeing that they were asleep from fatigue, made them rest on his breast and, as usual, gently caressed them to lull them to sleep. Seeing them forgotten in slumber, God wept in anticipation of the suffering they would experience upon waking, his heart broken by the pain caused by physical separation. The Creator left the couple sleeping on the grass, and after kissing the faces already marked by suffering, his light dissipated, becoming invisible and giving way to the darkness of this first night out of paradise. During their sleep, colorful dreams unfolded in the couple's subconscious, dreams of a happy past where the beauties of Eden were once again at the center of everything, and they ran, grateful for life, through flowery fields, playing with the animals. These animals, joyful, joined their voices with those of the angels to create harmonious songs of praise to the Creator. Many magnificent scenes unfolded in their subconscious, but unfortunately, gradually these dreams turned into nightmares, causing them to relive their tragedy. Now, totally agonizing, the couple awoke in the darkness of the first night in exile, and the inability to find sleep left them only to cry until the dawn consoled them, revealing in the distance a nostalgic paradise. Though invisible, a God remained by Adam and Eve's side on that hill, transforming their suffering into his own, along with their hope that one day he would return in victorious action. However, under the contemplative gaze of the Creator, the dark future of humanity also unfolded, where he saw with sadness countless creatures perishing without salvation by rejecting his love. His tears moistened his face as he anticipated how the enemy would use all his cunning to keep humans under his yoke, and the long night of sin would be prolonged. The battle for the reconquest of the lost kingdom was at stake, and the victory of the light would demand an immense sacrifice from God in the form of the Messiah, who would be born among men in due time with the mission to pay the price of redemption. Through him, many would be freed from the clutches of the enemy, all those who would accept him as Savior and King. However, against the chosen ones, the enemy would attack with all his might to try to make them fall. In his vision of the future, the Creator joyfully contemplated the final triumph that would rise with the redeemed, those who had been greatly tested, but who were still more than conquerors through him who had redeemed them from darkness to the kingdom of light. After participating in all the sufferings of the great struggle, the Eternal cast his gaze over the captive plains, contemplating the rebellious hordes ready to fight. The goal of these armies was to reclaim humanity to seal their right to dominion over the universe. Although war was contrary to the nature of the Creator, he would not hesitate to use his power to defend his children. However, his strength would only be used justly. If man rejected the protection offered by the sacrifice of the Messiah, God could do nothing to prevent his loss at the hands of the enemy. Adam and Eve had repented of their great sin, receiving by God's mercy garments of salvation symbolized by the skins of the sacrificed lamb. Justified by the offering of the couple, the Eternal summoned his mighty armies for battle. In swift obedience, the troops of light assaulted the outer space toward the earth, surrounding with their strong wall the hill bearing this treasure, redeemed by the blood of the divine King. Humanity was entrusted to take care of Eden, to govern nature, to prepare beds for the flowers, to harvest fruits for sustenance, to guide animals in their innocent lives and train them to be useful. These occupations had been sources of development and pleasure for them, and despite adversities they were to continue fulfilling this duty. The work done according to the Creator's orders would nullify many attacks from the enemy. The couple's first morning occupations brought them revelations about the great love of God hitherto unknown. As they gathered stones for the construction of the altar, they felt the pain of wounds from which blood flowed, as well as the ravages of fatigue that caused sweat to ooze from their bodies. Sensing and contemplating everything on their own skin, they loved the Savior even more. The built altar foreshadowed greater wounds where he would pour out all his blood, and fatigue would sap all the sap of his life. The nostalgic and hopeful look in the eyes of the couple from that moment on would never pass far, without discerning beforehand on the altar of sacrifice. This altar, with its stains of sweat and blood, would remain as a reminder of the pain and suffering that, after moistening the lips of human beings, would pour into the cup of the Creator. After contemplating for a long time the paradise of eternal life that stretched beyond this dark altar of death, the couple experienced the sweet relief of rest. Anxious to discover the landscapes of their new home, Adam and Eve, encouraged by hope, went out for a walk. Their steps led them through the paths of smiles and tears, songs and disillusionments, delicate and blooming flowers bathed in perfume, and faded flowers without scent. They passed by the animals still docile and submissive, and the animals now fierce and threatening. The pair then discerned in their walk the boundaries of two worlds, that of light and that of darkness, that of love and that of selfishness, that of hope and that of despair, that of harmony and that of disharmony, that of life and that of death. This vision filled them with sadness, and they wept long. This sadness would only grow further in the future, as they would gradually discover the depth of these realities along their descendants. 6 dawns had already colored the skies, announcing to the couple the dark and cold nights which, with their cloak of darkness, made all images vivid, except that of the hope of seeing them colored again at the rise of light. The hour of sacrifice was approaching, when the sturdy altar, embraced in its righteousness, would demand blood. If the offering was not made, it would surely burst, engulfing the whole world in its flames. There would then be neither dawn nor hope of seeing the light bloom again. How precious life was, and blood was life. Life is light for a being, and this night would be eternal without the rising of day. This being would assume the guilt of all, giving his blood to the sturdy altar. Who would offer himself? Who would pour out the lifeblood until the last gleam faded in his sky? Adam and Eve, after long reflection, while contemplating the cradle of death built by their hands, looked at each other anxiously with this decisive question: who will offer themselves? This inquiry, born of their guilt, resonated deep within their memories the voice of the blessed Creator, who in his revelation of infinite goodness said to them, "I love you with an eternal love, and will die in your place." Grateful, the couple respectfully bowed before the thirsty altar, seeing by faith it filled with the gift of eternal love. On this evening of the 6th day, God subjected man to a formidable test of faith. There was an altar of stones built according to divine order, but there were no sheep for sacrifice. In their longing, they remembered Eden, where there were many flocks. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, Adam and Eve began to cry out to God for help, for they knew that only a miracle could provide them at this last moment with a lamb for sacrifice. In the eyes of the inhabitants of the universe, the miracle that man was clamoring for had already been arranged for nearly a week, guided by the Creator. A spotless lamb had come out of Eden and was following the couple's trail on their way into exile. During its long journey, the animal faced many challenges and dangers, but protected and guided by the Eternal, it continued its mission. When the shadows of dusk began to envelop the hill, the couple who had undergone such a severe test of faith discerned a small white dot hopping in the grass and approaching them. As it drew closer, the form seemed to speak of hope, life, and warmth. Seeing that the great miracle had occurred, they ran to meet the lamb, enfolding it in their arms. It was tired but did not want to rest, for it would soon rest. It was thirsty but did not want to drink, for to drink and to the altar that demands blood, this lamb had the will to live in the arms of man, but it would die to be able to live in the arms of God. It was a perfect symbolism of the Redeemer who would leave his glory to seek the sinner, and the darkness of a prefigurative night descended slowly, enveloping all nature in its prison. Now its strength would be laid low before man, with the brilliance of a special fire lit by the hands of divine forgiveness on the lifeless body of the Lamb. Everything was ready for the painful blow, an act that would extinguish the last gleam of life from those gentle eyes, plunging them into the cold darkness of an eternal night. Thus, darkness would generate light, cold would generate warmth, and death would generate life. All these inverted gifts would be nothing more than the fruits of divine love offered to sinful hands, ever ready to hurt amidst this silent night. The altar implored, the sorrowful man cried out, while the mute lamb did not demand to be laid for death. The hands that had built the altar rose, not to caress as before, but to wound, bleeding before the price of forgiveness. It was but a gesture, nothing more, and the gleam would forever extinguish from innocent eyes, shining the light of salvation upon the guilty face. Adam, trembling with uncertainty and compassion, was a gentle and submissive lamb ready to die in his place. Coming as the promised Saviour with a repentant heart, in a painful effort, I thrust the stone knife into the chest of the animal, which perished in my hands without even uttering a whimper. The power of the night was immediately laid low by the brilliance of the fire of acceptance. Its light reveals to the human being his tragic condition, and seeing the hands stained with innocent blood, the couple feels guilty of this death. Amidst tears they kneel before the altar, which no longer demands blood but offers them light, accepting undeserved forgiveness. Rising, the couple contemplates the sadly wounded body of the poor lamb, feeling utterly incapable of thanking the riches granted in exchange for such a harsh blow. Bathed in the light of sacrifice, Adam and his companion remain silent, pondering, until a deep sleep overtakes them. Lying on the ground, covered in soft grass, they fall asleep under the warm rays of the sun, certain that their glow and warmth will endure until the darkness of this Saturday completely disappears with the resplendent sun and the light of the Lamb. Since it was lit on the altar that night, it has remained in constant war with the darkness. Several times its brilliance has grown, pushing the cold darkness far away, bathing nature in its life-giving rays. Sometimes, the darkness bringing its violent cold nearly extinguished the flame completely. In its great effort, it fed on the blood of the Lamb, sending its fiery flame upward and flooding everything around it with light and warmth. The conflict between the light-born of sacrifice and the darkness that night revealed many important lessons to the faithful of the universe, with truths that would occupy their minds for all eternity. In this flame was seen the representation of the millennial conflict between good and evil, a conflict that would endure until the eternal dawn. The eternal prelude to his future sacrifice had lit in the midst of darkness the light of truth which would remain burning in the heart of man through his blood, that would be shed for the remission of guilt. Against this light, the enemy would launch all the cold winds of evil, banishing its gentle glow from the hearts of many beings. How many would be lost by rejecting the light of divine forgiveness, enveloped by the darkness of the black night? After long hours of battle, the signs of dawn emerge in the sky. The darkness that had cast its winds upon the immortal flame, trying to banish it, fades in the face of the signs of dawn. The sky, now tinted with an intense red, reminds us of the blood that flowed from the Lamb's breast so that the flame of forgiveness could illuminate the human night. Amidst the blood coloring, the shining sun rises on the horizon, bringing in its warm rays the taste of victory, enveloping everything in life. The dawn, in its nostalgic aspect, caresses the distant paradise, where from its beloved bosom, in its morning breeze, the aroma of nostalgia serves as a message of comfort and hope to the suffering creatures of the valley of death. Bathed in the warm rays and the hopeful breeze, the couple awakens to another Saturday, whose symbolism points to rest in the kingdom of God, and how the end of the great conflict between light and darkness would be. Beyond this altar covered in ashes, Adam and Eve contemplate the nostalgic paradise. Though distant in their exile, they rejoice with the certainty that the sacrifice of the Messiah will mark for them the Sabbath of Sabbaths, where tears will be banished forever. The sun will always shine in a clear sky. The lambs will always be alive to play in the grass. There will be no twilight, and there will be no more altar covered in blood and ashes. So they sigh in longing for that day of glory, when God will become eternally visible and will hold in his hands the marks of his infinite love for his children before humanity's fall. Just as all the heavenly armies learned at the feet of the Creator, who patiently taught them the treasures of wisdom contained in the vast compendium of nature, the entire universe, from the tiniest atom to the greatest of worlds, testified in its perfect existence to the character of the divine King, adopting in it many of his teachings. However, these truths would now remain hidden in the pages of this great book after the period preceding the fall, for they were like stars hidden during the day, revealing their brilliance only when lighting up the shadows of the night. Nature, now captive, the enemy trying to block the revelation of eternal wisdom, introduced stains of selfishness, destruction, unhappiness, and death. But he did not know that these stains would show on the face of creation the depth of God's justice and love, leading the faithful to love and reverence him even more. The pair, as well as all the children of light, now saw the wounded nature breaking its veil, revealing with it new aspects of the goodness of the Creator, hidden until now. They were accustomed to the eternal flowers of paradise that now bloomed in tender buds amidst threats of thorns ready to hurt them. These tender flowers, despite their proximity to the thorns, exhaled sweet fragrances of praise and gratitude, never tiring of pleasing their surroundings, and when they were beaten by the cold winds of the night, they did not resist, rather offering their aroma to transform the fury of the winds into a fragrant breeze of a sunrise. Guided by deep gratitude, the spouses closely accompanied the love mystery of these flowers that never tired of blessing, offering their beauty and fragrance as relief for those wounded by the harsh pins. These singular and pure flowers, after showing in their short life that forgiveness and love are stronger than all the winds and thorns, still exhale their fragrance in a final effort to communicate joy, then fall faded and lifeless on the cold ground. Where forgotten, they become insignificant dust scattered by the wind. The death of the flowers, though it did not seem a failure, revealed before the couple the mystery of the rebirth of life. In dying, the flowers gave life to fruits, which in turn, after serving as breath, gave their seeds filled with life. In the death of these seeds, the miracle of life was reborn, multiplying the trees with their flowers, ready to repeat the teaching of love and sacrifice. Thus nature, still tainted by sin, still revealed the hidden mystery of the redemption plan. Just as each flower that bloomed amidst the thorns was a symbol of the Savior who would be born amidst the thorns of evil to comfort the fragrance of afflicted hearts. Just as the flower, the Messiah, after showing that love and forgiveness are stronger than all the winds of hate, and that the truth and justice of the kingdom of God are greater than all the lies and injustices of the kingdom of the enemy, would pour out the sap of his life in dying to redeem the guilty. Chapter 6. Adam and Eve dedicated themselves to work in an edifying manner, thus transforming the hill into a miniature Eden. Feeling divine protection and care every day, the couple gained experience in fulfilling the commandment on sacrifice. They fall into the trickery of the enemy, who tries to turn the symbols of sacrifice into bearers of forgiveness and life. Adam and Eve offer sacrifices to the Lord, and the Eternal manifests himself by placing them under his protection, warning them of dangers, and promising the birth of their firstborn. Responsibilities towards their son Cain begin, reminding of the promise of the future Messiah. Cain's rebellious youth is used by the enemy to mock God's suffering and his faithful, attempting to make God abandon his redemption plan. However, the Eternal reaffirms his solemn promise. Adam and Eve make sacrifices and pray for their son. The Eternal reveals himself to Cain, recounting the story of Lucifer and the sun. God promises the birth of Abel and Cain, while Lucifer is led by his pride into a false illusion. God seeks every possible way to save Cain. Comforted by the revelations of nature, Adam and his companion, students of the school of suffering, learn each day to love the Savior more, growing in wisdom, humility, and holiness. All the virtues destroyed by sin are reborn in their hearts with enthusiasm. The pair dedicates themselves to uplifting work, planting gardens filled with fragrant flowers and delicious fruits through the power of God. Their home in exile becomes a refuge for persecuted animals from the valleys. Under the protection of the angels of light, the hill becomes a miniature of Eden, with much love among the gathered and domesticated animals. Adam and Eve could not look at these docile animals, destined for sacrifice, without feeling a mixture of pain and gratitude deep in their souls. Every sixth day, a latent sense of unease began to be felt beyond the pain. Who would give their blood at the altar when the last sheep perishes? It was then, before the awestruck eyes of the couple, that the miracle of love occurred. Renewing the hope of living more weeks under the glow of the flame of forgiveness, a sheep, the fattest of them all, began to bleed as in sacrifice. From her pain were born 4 lambs filled with joy and gratitude. Adam and Eve prostrated themselves before the invisible Savior, holding in their hands these new creatures who bore in their eyes the same tenderness and willingness to sacrifice. Sure that new miracles would multiply their days, the couple united their voices, as before, in a song of gratitude and worship to the Creator, who, like the lambs, would also be born of pain to accomplish the greatest sacrifice of his life, the salvation of humanity. Although the Lord is invisible to human eyes, he always remains very close, accompanied by an army of angels, in tireless service of care and protection. The couple was unaware that the sweetness and peace reigning on the hill, as well as all their prosperity, were the fruit of intense struggles. If their eyes were open to the invisible scenes, they would be horrified by the terrible struggle of the enemy and his hosts, who constantly sought to ruin humanity and snatch it from the hands of the Creator. Seeing that the use of force would not lead to victory, the enemy, in his cunning, set a trap to ensnare the couple. Gathering his armies, he revealed his plans, telling humanity that they must sacrifice lambs as symbols of the Savior to come. Thus they would tempt them to see these symbols as bearers of forgiveness and life, gradually forgetting the reality of the sacrifice promised by God. It would be a slow process, but victory is assured. Knowing the danger of this trap, the Creator was saverned as he looked to the future, for he could see so many of his children turned away from the path of salvation. They would cling to the symbols, thinking to find in them virtue. In his love and care, God would not let them remain ignorant of the danger that threatened them. He knew how much Adam and his companion loved these lambs, offered in light and warmth on the altar. They could easily be induced to see them as sources of life and light, and to begin to venerate them. Many weeks had passed, bringing with them nights of pain and sacrifice, followed by days of hope and nostalgia for the loving Father who, after making promises and drying their tears, had become invisible to their eyes. Each passing day brought to the pair a new burden of nostalgia, making them wonder every evening, when will we again be able to embrace his face? When will we be able to envelop ourselves in his arms, walking in the light of his love? How much they longed for those Edenic nights when they fell asleep, in the gentle embrace of their divine Father. So, after one more week of work and lessons learned, just as the sun announced another night of repentance and innocent blood to bathe the altar, the silent couple found themselves with the surprise that, after the painful blow that was always followed by the fire, the blessed face of the Father would be revealed to them. With trembling hands, Adam lifted the lamb, which, silent, did not resist when placed on the altar. Tears rolled down his face as he thought that another innocent living being would be plunged into the hated dark death in order to generate light with its blood. Although the sacrifice was painful, there was no other path to salvation, for only through the shed blood of the lamb could they live to behold the Father's face in the future. With a painful effort, Adam dropped the sharp stone onto the lamb, which shed its blood in a groan of pain. Suddenly, a glorious light dispelled the darkness, flooding the entire hill with its rays of life. Through tears, the couple once again contemplated the Creator in the fire of the altar. In a gesture of love, God opened his arms as before, and with a smile, moved towards the long-awaited embrace. Without finding words to express their immense nostalgia, the couple threw themselves into his chest and wept bitterly. The Divine Father, moved, also wept, but tried to console his children with his gentle smile. With emotion, the couple gazed at the Father's face, enveloping him with kisses and affection. Their love for him had intensified with suffering. Grateful and happy, they walked alongside the Creator, showing gardens full of flowers and fruits, sharing the lessons learned with nature, and presenting the domestic herd with affection. Enlightened by the gentle light of the Eternal Father, the couple sat at his feet as before to listen to his teachings. The Creator, looking at them tenderly, warned them of dangers and guided them on the sacrifices of the Lamb, emphasizing the importance of always remembering the certainty of a Savior to come, who, like the lambs, would be sacrificed for the redemption of sinners. However, the lambs did not have within themselves the power to forgive sins, for they were merely symbols of the Messianic King. After becoming aware of the danger of attaching themselves to symbols to find salvation in them, the couple was tasked with passing on these guidelines to their descendants. After warning humanity, the Creator looked at the sleeping ewe with her baby and exclaimed, "How beautiful are the lambs!" The couple, blending happiness and pain, added, "When they are awake, they leap for joy, forgetting that to be born and to die causes much pain." After contemplating the lambs, God looked at the couple tenderly, revealing something that surprised and delighted them. "When these 36 lambs have ascended the altar, your arms will be reunited with the first child who, like them, will also arise from pain. This child in his infancy will bring you joy by leaping like a lamb in your house. You must instruct him devotedly in the laws of harmony, showing him the path of redemption, and like you, he will be free to choose the direction to follow." Listening to the divine promise with joy, but also feeling the profound responsibility, Adam and Eve knew that Satan would do everything to lead the promised son to perdition. After the promise, each lamb offered on the altar gave them hope of the joy that would soon come to the earth. When Eve was pregnant with 36 lambs, finally descending into the darkness according to the time determined by the Creator, the first light that the first child would bring manifested. With hands still stained with the blood of sacrifice, Adam protected his wife, who, at the foot of the altar, fell prostrate from the pain. The first child, rather than displaying the joy of freedom, had the tears of his captivity. This cry would have lasted all night if it hadn't been for the glow of the burning flame of hope that soon drew the baby's attention. Wrapped in joy, she was comforted by her suffering and said, "I have reached the Lord's promise." She called her son Cain, and after wrapping him in the soft skins of a lamb, the couple stayed awake to meditate. Many thoughts occupied their minds: joy, gratitude, hope, and the sense of responsibility that now weighed on their shoulders. Tenderly caressing the child, the couple matured in their experience, understanding better the mysterious love of God, who had offered to die in their place to save their children. Adam and Eve were not alone in their reflections, for all the intelligent beings in the universe watched with interest the future of this defenseless baby, bearer of a kingdom of infinite dimensions within, which two powers disputed. Who would then be the Lord of his life, walking the ascending path leading to life or descending into the abyss of eternal death? Seeing the baby sketch his first smile, the couple suddenly remembered the promise of the Creator, that was confirmed with each sacrifice. The Savior would be born of the woman as a child, bearing the mission to redeem humanity. Would he not fulfill this promise here? This baby with eyes shining with joy, resembling the lambs born to be sacrificed. Considering this, the couple, holding the child against their chest, began to weep without consolation. How terrible it would be to offer an innocent child on the bitter altar. But then, for the afflicted couple, the bright sun finally appeared, reviving with its warm rays the promises that indicated a Savior who would also be born from pain to fulfill the eternal plan of redemption. Blessed by the Creator and surrounded by the love and care of his parents, the child developed in his physical and mental nature, becoming each day the special focus of the ceaseless battle between spiritual forces. Adam and Eve were not alone in their reflections, for all the intelligent beings in the universe watched with interest the future of this defenseless baby, bearer of a kingdom of infinite dimensions within, which two powers disputed. Anxious to make him understand the truths of salvation, they took him in their arms every morning and, at the edge of the altar, showed him the distant Eden, recounting those stories full of emotion that little Cain could not yet comprehend. What immense joy these parents felt when they saw him, on a sunny morning, pointing to the hearth of nostalgia, uttering the sacred name of the Creator. Moved, they embraced him, asking him to repeat this sublime name which, like a key to happiness, always uncovered a paradise of eternal love. All the cohorts of light bowed with joy upon hearing the little one pronounce the name of the divine King. Weeks passed, bringing new victims to the altar, and little Cain, the object of God's attentions and care, the cohorts of light, and those tireless parents in their mission of instruction, gathering his sparse words, always curious about everything, began to ask questions. As the day declined, the child, lying on his mother's lap, asked her why the sun always left like that, leaving people in the cold darkness. Astonished, his mother looked at him, unable to find words to answer the question that reminded her of the happy past destroyed by her fault. After a moment of silence, embracing little Cain's face, she said to him, "My son, one day the sun will come to stay, bringing in its rays a world of harmony. There will be no more animals to fight or lambs to die on the altar." Little Cain, eager to see this day dawn soon, said to his mother, "Mom, tomorrow the sun will rise in paradise. Pray for it to stay so I can play, and never sleep again." Impatient to see the day that would never end, little Cain only fell asleep after making his mother promise to ask the sun to stay. A new day of radiant sunshine appeared for Cain, bringing in its rays joy and warmth. As he played in the garden, his curious eyes often turned to the sun, seeming to caress it with a hopeful smile. However, as he walked westward, the little one ran to his mother, asking her, "Mom, did you promise the sun to stay?" Taking him in her arms, she smiled at him, trying to make him understand with simple words while pointing to the distant paradise, the story of redemption, where the sun would one day come to stay. Unsatisfied with his mother's words, Cain showed no patience to wait for that distant day. Repeating through tears, he said, "I want the sun now, not tomorrow." His mother patiently tried to calm him, speaking of God's light that could turn night into day. She loved him and could fill his little heart with light, joy, and patience, allowing him to happily await the day of his dreams. Shaking his head in refusal of maternal comfort, Cain said through sobs, "I want the sun, because I can see it, not the eternal." Cain's rebellious words pierced Eve's heart like a painful arrow, making her weep bitterly. Infinite sadness now hovered over the rejected Creator's heart. The first steps on the descending path of rebellion were drawn in Cain's gestures. How many would follow him to death? Ignoring the sadness that had befallen the kingdom of light, Adam, seeing the sun decline on the horizon, interrupted his work in the field and headed home. He had a song in his heart as he walked towards another meeting with his people. Approaching the altar, he saw his companion prostrate in tears. Little Cain was also there, crying. Taking him in his arms, he asked him anxiously, "What happened, my son?" Sadly, Cain replied, "Mom, let the sun not stay still." Protecting his son with his left arm, Adam placed his right hand on Eve's shoulder but found no words to console her. The phrase uttered by his son seemed to tear his heart, making him relive the fall. After reflecting again, Adam, feeling guilty, answered Cain, "It was Daddy who prevented the sun from staying, my son." With sobs of great sadness, Adam joined them in tears. However, the memory of the Saviour consoled them, wiping away their tears and those of their little one. With tenderness he said to them, "We can rejoice, my son, for God has promised to make the sun shine forever in the sky. It will be like the fire that appears on the altar, driving away the darkness of the night." With his eyes fixed on the last gleam of the tree, Cain remained inconsolable that night. There was not, as usual, a joyful dinner, and the saddened little family remained silent, meditating for long hours until they drifted sleepily under the starlight. The enemy and his cohorts mocked God's sacrifice and his faithful that night with sarcasm and malice, repeating Cain's rebellious words. Satan, considering himself victorious, declared, "See how your little slave rejects you. The same will happen to all who are born. I am sure the right of dominion will never escape me." All the rebel cohorts echoed the deceiver's insults, humiliating the subjects of light, who suffered alongside the Eternal. With his insults, the enemy sought to make God abandon his plan of redemption. If he succeeded, his kingdom of darkness would extend for all eternity, supplanting the reign of light. In response to the enemy's challenge, the Eternal solemnly affirmed, "Even if all reject me, I will keep my promise." The Creator could not bear the idea of seeing little Cain heading towards perdition, interceding for him every day, offering the shed blood to justice. Mighty angels kept him constantly, frightening the spiritual darkness that awaited him, seeking to make him insensitive to the benefits of salvation. Adam and Eve, in their tireless love, taught Cain spiritual lessons illustrated in nature every day. Every Saturday, they tried to reinforce in his youthful mind the hope of eternal life, the fruit of the Saviour's sacrifice who, after living a sinless life, would die like a lamb to forever dispel the darkness. However, Cain, sometimes moved by these teachings, often hesitated, questioning with rebellion, why did Lucifer rebel one night, refusing to listen to his parents' advice, accusing them of everything, saying, "If now we have no shining sun, it's your fault." The contemplation of the distant Eden bathed in sunlight aroused adventurous feelings in Cain's youthful heart. He began to think that this paradise was not as far away as his parents claimed. "Why wait and suffer so much?" he thought. "It is so beautiful to see the sun rise every day. I want to conquer both. It would be easier to stop the light at its source, and thus we would live in a paradise of eternal sunshine." Cain's adventurous ideas filled Adam and Eve's hearts with sadness, for they saw that his interest was solely in the present, where he dreamed of a paradise of happiness and light conquered by force. In his plans, he did not feel the need for a savior, for though he was young, intelligent, full of life and ideals, the days of struggle, intercession, and sacrifices for Cain's destiny were behind him. Each day offered him precious opportunities to bond with the Savior, but he rejected them all in his unbelief. He came to doubt the existence of this God he had never seen. Facing them, his afflicted but still patient parents tried to turn him away from the perdition towards which he was heading. Thus, they were promised that one day, smiling incredulously, Cain would believe in the Creator and his plan of salvation, provided he became visible at the time of sacrifice. With fervent faith, these afflicted parents began to plead with the Eternal. His visible presence could, who knows, save their beloved son, who became more rebellious every day. The Creator heard the cries of the afflicted parents, even though he knew that his appearance would hardly break the young man's rebellious spirit, ready to fulfill the demand. He extended his friendly arms towards Cain, trying with love to win his heart. Knowing his desires and dreams of adventure, he could easily identify with him, captivating him. Was not the creation of the universe a great adventure? Was not his dream to see it dotted with resplendent suns lighting billions of worlds with its glow? Was not the greatest of them to traverse the valley of death in search of the conquest of the distant Eden, forever uniting the sun in its sky? They had much in common. Cain was curious on this sixth day. Seeing his parents' faces, he sensed the spirit and joy that flowed from great faith. Stimulated by the expression of confidence, the young man began to help them in the preparations for the Holy Saturday. The sun finally withdrew, rolling towards the west, leaving, as always, its trace of nostalgia, announcing fear in the darkness. And Cain distinguished the white figure of the lamb raised towards the altar by the hands of the Father, that tireless priest who always prayed to the Creator for the salvation of his beloved Son. With raised hand, Adam prepared for the blow that could, who knows, shatter the disbelief in Cain's heart, making way for belief in salvation. In an instant, a prayer of faith escaped from his lips. "Eternal Father, hear my plea. My son needs you. Just one of your looks can conquer him." Please, sir, this sincere prayer fell upon the ears of this son who touched him. Just in prayer would suffice to convince him of the real existence of a Savior. As he wiped away tears of emotion, Cain shuddered at the stroke of death. Everything was solemn at that moment. The Creator of the world would come in response to the prayer of love. How would he meet him? With a gradation, an intense glow soon enveloped the entire hill, also bathing the eastern valley. Cain's wide-open eyes then settled on the benevolent eyes of the Creator, which emitted a light superior to that of the sun, but different. Admiringly contemplating, Cain exclaimed, "He is young like me and resembles the sun." Adam and Eve, moved by great nostalgia, longed to jump into the Saviour's arms and kiss him, but they first let Cain reunite with joy. They saw their precious son enveloped in the arms of the great friend who seemed like a star. After a long embrace, God, with a kiss, also embraced the beloved couple, companions of suffering. They joyfully went for a walk in the gardens of the hill. The Creator and Cain went to the center, and Adam and his companion walked on the sides. What happiness they felt with each step, conquered by the affection of the Eternal Father. He showed him his favorite animals and his little garden full of beautiful flowers. Filled with happiness at seeing the colors in this night illuminated by the Creator, it was as if the sun itself had descended among them. Thinking of the sun, Cain, as much as he loved it, began to talk about it. The sun is beautiful and good, yet when it leaves in its tears of blood a feeling of sadness and fear. Everything disappears in its absence. The animals, the garden, even the birds fall silent in their songs, but enough to say that it will reappear and everything is filled with charm again. Nature awakens from its sweetness, still pretending to fear the darkness, but when it sees it flee, it remains alert and sings. The animals, the birds, the garden, everything returns to a happy life. But this bliss always ends. After uttering these words, Cain, looking at the Creator, asked curiously, "Dad always says that it's you who created the sun. Is it true?" With a smile of sincerity, God affirmatively replied. At the beginning of everything, that's how he continued, Cain heard then towards the west. "He never flees," replied the Eternal. "It is the world that flees from him and is sad in its ingratitude." But as Cain asked, looking at his face of light with affectionate words, God began to tell him the story of Lucifer, who, in his ingratitude, drove from his eyes and the eyes of many creatures the glow of his face, which was the true sun. After acting like this, he deceived many by saying that the sun was the one fleeing from them with his cunning, continued the Creator. The rebel angel tried to lead humans into darkness, and he succeeded. That day the sun wept so many tears of blood that it bathed the entire sky. However, in its last sigh of light, it promised that the world, already caught by darkness, would shine again forever, filling everything with life. After uttering these words, the Eternal, looking at this young man with a sad expression in his eyes, concluded by saying that the rebel angel promised his disciples to stop the sun with his strength, but he could never realize this plan because he does not have the bond that could stop it: love. Dropping his head, Cain listened from the mouth of the Creator this story of promises that he had already heard enough from his parents. This story did not please him, for it showed a long night of sacrifices on the altar and a Savior who seemed to be in pain. In reality, Cain saw no reason for all this. Why not banish suffering by coloring the darkness with light in an effort to conquer it? The Eternal, with much love, looked at this satisfied young man and told him that only the blood of his sacrifice could make the sun shine forever in a realm of eternal happiness and peace. There was no other way for this conquest, so he should be patient, resting under his protection. After speaking at length with Cain, trying to make him recognize his need for salvation, the Eternal turned to the couple, consoling them with the promise of the birth of another son. They would undergo 36 more sacrifices, and in his arms, wrapped in a second son, would also be born from pain, but he would bring in his eyes the brightness and comfort of salvation. His testimony of faithfulness would be perpetuated by all generations as the symbol of an altar covered in blood. Weeks passed, bringing the couple new joys and sorrows, with a heart full of life beating in Eve's womb, and a void filled with the smell of death growing in the heart of young Cain. Although he was dazzled by the manifestation of God, this appearance did not change his arrogant thoughts about the meaning of life. He saw no sense in the sacrifices offered on the altar. In the days following his encounter with the Creator, he argued with his parents, saying, "If I were as powerful as the Eternal, I would never submit to sacrifice to regain the lost kingdom. He is strong and shines like the sun. He could, with a word, drive away all darkness and restore paradise to us. Why so much suffering?" Thus Cain claimed to be wiser than the Creator, and who knows, perhaps he would have the chance to advise him at a future meeting. In this way, young Cain plunged deeper and deeper into the abyss of pride and selfishness. Instead of rejoicing in the place he would reach by walking towards victory, hadn't Lucifer been attracted, with a third of the heavenly armies, by this same illusion? The merciful God, however, would not seal Cain's fate without first attempting to save him from eternal ruin. Thus, undeserved grace, the fruit of divine love, would be granted to all human beings born into this world.